vào global. Chị xem bên dưới.
Nó chơi nó có năng lượng gì
được một chút điểm.
có thể gửi các lời chuyện em gửi hết các tấm hôm qua là mình ép họ về những cái từ nhưng mà đúng là cái mà họ phải biết họ phải được cái cách nói à không ạ bởi vì em share
em mang để một cái khác, em mang để một cái khác luôn rồi. Và sẽ tìm được skill.
gì thế?
Hình như là cái máy của em nó liên với cái loa đúng không?
Đúng rồi, không sao được rồi. Mình phải like là cái kia mình đúng chứ.
Rồi nhưng không được tại mình đi qua restream.
Thì sao?
Thì nó lại start một stream rồi.
Rồi thì cái gì?
Thì cũng đây nhỉ. Title copy từ bên kia xong.
Tôi lỡ rồi nên là phải xóa lên đi. Lên luôn em. Mình xóa đi không được không được.
Cho em tên luôn rồi.
Xóa đi đã đi. Để không được
Chị thấy chưa?
xóa nó cũ đi.
Xóa cũ đây. Vào live là phải nhớ.
Như này.
Is this your first time in Boston?
No,
second. Okay, nice. Germany here for the first time. Oh, nice. Okay, lovely. It's very rainy today, so it's not very nice out. The weather.
Yeah.
That's okay. No, I'm a guest today, so I am the executive director for Public Interest Technology in England. So we're trying to unite the universities and the government and the nonprofits all work together.
Thì mình lại không nghe được bên mic.
Nhưng mà cũng không nói nhiều.
That was my first time.
Em nghĩ là mình
Chưa bao giờ họ nói.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
em nghĩ là cái này
Yeah, okay. Cool. All right, that's good to know. Yeah, it's a very amazing work that they're doing. I'm so excited to hear about all of
Okay,
it
rồi.
today. Nice to meet you.
Chị muốn đổi đấy là màn hình của em, camera chị được chuyển.
Không đừng thấy
Nó sẽ có đúng rồi ạ.
bây giờ em sẵn sàng tạo slide chứ nhớ hết chưa?
Đây rồi ạ.
em để lại
Cái đầu tiên là của bác đầu tiên là của bác Tuấn. Đây là gì?
Đánh số đi cho nhớ.
có chế độ không mà
Đó, nói chung là mình em đã thấy cái đó chưa?
không view hết thì có cho anh nói bật cái phụ lên
Bác Tuấn nhưng suốt đúng. Số 13 cái gì Tuấn.
Let everyone share the Đấy, cái một không được.
Nhưng mà lúc mình có mở lại thì
Đến phần discussion em thử luôn với ông
đa cái cô là của quen
không lúc chị mở thì mở lên ai mở
thì lúc đó để phải nói chung là đến discussion còn đến không biết
What's the best way for you guys to get here? What do you think?
em phải quan tâm nhé.
I have to leave this or
Ông này đang nãy giờ đang thu tiếng ở đâu đấy?
alo alo cái kia
Đấy, chưa bắt đầu thì tắt.
đúng rồi ạ. Đúng rồi ạ. đúng rồi đấy ạ. Dạ, 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 đúng rồi đấy ạ. Dạ,
you I'm Tom Patterson. I'm one of the co-founders of Boston Global Forum. Want to introduce, or at least recognize, later we will introduce, recognize our special guest, Boston Global Forum. Want to introduce, or at least back here. I'm hearing myself about 10 seconds after I speak, but welcome, Alondra.
So that's your digital club.
Welcome, Alondra. How are you? Thank you for coming, Governor Dukakis. We got a couple of guests that have come quite a ways. Nobody, I don't know, see with the light, I can't quite see where you are in the room, but in from Japan, the Boston Global Forum representative there, Francisco, Italy. Thank you for coming both at some distance. So I do want to recognize Tuan. Everybody in the Boston Global Forum, I think, understands how important Tuan's role has been to developing this organization, putting these events together. We had a very nice lunch, some of us, over at the faculty club. There were 12 of us around the table. There was a 13th person who should have been at the table, who wasn't there. That was Tuan. And he's over here organizing things to make sure everything goes off smoothly. And so I think we can all thank Tuan for everything that he does for this organization. Now, I think an organization like the Boston Global Forum really faces the challenge of choosing and scaling its efforts so that they align with its position and its resources. Now, we've not always done that, and I think hits and misses are just inherent in any organization, and we're a relatively young organization. But I think there are two initiatives in particularly where we've struck that balance just about right. One is our AI World Society Initiative, which we launched, some of you will remember, in 2017. And the idea of that initiative is to help shape the governance of AI. And that has led us to work with the G7, with the UN, with the Club de Madrid World Leadership Alliance, and the C20 and the G20 in promoting internationally ethical and responsible uses of AI. The second initiative is more recent. That's the Knowledge Platform for AI. Now this one truly excites me. It will be a centralized repository of knowledge to inform AI decision making. We are developing a platform with information that's rooted in ethics and standards, that's comprehensive and reflects diverse viewpoints, that's reliable as a result of careful curation, and that draws from the top minds, organizations, and institutions. And in this initiative, we're going to be partnering with, among others, the Imperial College of London and the Trusted AI Alliance. We'll be organizing seminars and conferences, as well as pushing out information through social media and other ways of disseminating what we have in that repository. This we can do, and this is what we should be doing, something like this for the Boston Global Forum. It's an area in which we can make a difference. Tuan, Nasli, Jeff, David Hall are going to say more about that initiative in the second half of today's program. So now let me introduce Governor Dukakis, who will introduce our special guest and this year's recipient of the World Leader in AIWS. Mike, as you know, three-time governor of Massachusetts, held a faculty position at Northeastern, also one at UCLA. One of his, someone who met him at UCLA was at that lunch today and spoke of that experience as a young student walking into the office, and Mike graciously giving him an hour of time. And that's the Mike Dukakis that we know and that's provided such extraordinary leadership for the Boston Global Forum. Mike. Thanks, Tom, and thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be part of this organization. It's doing very essential work. And we thank all of you for joining us and for working with us on this. Who is that? It's my pleasure to present the 2024 World Leader in AI World Society Award to Dr. Alondra Nelson. Where is she? Oh. This award, which was begun in 2018, is part of the Boston Global Forum's ongoing commitment to promoting the responsible and ethical development of AI. As the former Deputy Assistant to President Joe Biden and Acting Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, Dr. Nelson has played a pivotal role in shaping the landscape of AI governance and policy. Her leadership at OSTP led to the development of the groundbreaking Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which became federal policy through President Biden's executive order. It addresses the critical issue of how AI should be incorporated into government and society. More recently, she was appointed U.S. Representative to the United Nations High-Level Advisory Board on Artificial Intelligence. The new advisory board strengthens the UN's efforts to address international governance issues raised by artificial intelligence. Dr. Nelson's leadership has led to let her be named to the Time 100 list of the most influential people in AI and to be designated as one of the top 10 influences in science by Nature magazine. Today we honor Dr. Nelson's extraordinary contributions and to address as profoundly our profoundly gratitude for her tireless efforts to advance civil and human rights, democratic freedoms, and responsible AI practices. Her unwavering dedication exemplifies the core principles of the AI World Society initiative, and her vision continues to inspire us all as we navigate the complexities of the AI age. Dr. Nelson, where is she? Thanks a lot. Dr. Nelson, on behalf of the Boston Global Forum and the others gathered here and online today, I extend my heartfelt congratulations. We are privileged to recognize your outstanding contributions and look forward to the continued impact of your work. Thank you very, very much.
the special hit from Champion Khánh. They are special hit they present for President of APEC. So now they present and they honor Alondra because they high respect Alondra Nelson for his achievement, her achievement and contribution.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. If you had asked me 4 years ago, 14 years ago, 40 years ago, if I would be in a room with Governor Dukakis saying kind words about me, I wouldn't have even been able to believe it. And I'm immensely grateful to have the opportunity to meet him, and I'm immensely grateful for this recognition, the award. So thank you, Governor Dukakis. Thank you to the Boston Global Forum. I know they're founders and funders of this important institution here, and just incredibly honored. And you know, I also want to say that those of us who work in government, you know, do it knowing that it's incredibly hard work and that most people will just probably not say kind things about you, and indeed will say not kind things about you. So it's also just incredibly overwhelming and unexpected. So thank you all. I look forward to the conversation with Professor Patterson, and thank you for your opening remarks. Thank you to Tuan, who when I was working in Washington, was one of the interesting people who would write to you with encouragement, who would say, we've got some ideas, we've got this white paper, have you seen this article? There's this kind of constant flow of people, and we've only met recently, but we've sort of had this kinship and this commitment to you know, responsible, equitable science and technology policy, and particularly AI policy. I want to you know, while I'm deeply honored by this, I think any of us who've ever done anything that we hoped would be consequential know that you never do it alone, whether it's writing a paper or, you know, trying to do policy for emerging technology. And there are two people here who were really important parts of that work in Washington. Alex Pascal, who was at the Domestic Policy Council and was really the anchor for science and technology policy there, who's there. Ami Fields-Meyer, who was my advisor at OSTP, and the chief of staff, my chief of staff there, who you'll hear from later. I spied Cam Carey coming into the room, and so I want to also say that as much as we're proud of the work that we did in the Biden-Harris administration and that's still going on, it was people like Cam that really planted seeds, you know, green shoots of things that we were able to do and carry forward in his time in the Biden administration and at the Department of Commerce in particular. So thank you for being here, Cam, and thank you for that work. Okay, so let me get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about how, you know, I think very much in my personal capacity, I'll be talking I think about the work and some of the work we did in the Biden-Harris administration, but very much from my own perspective, and now about a year out from having done that work. So the next slide, please. So an obligatory first slide just about what AI is. I think most people are here because they have some inkling or think they have an inkling of what it is. But just to level set, you know, I just borrowed this definition from the OECD, which is that you know, excuse me, I've got two asynchronous slides happening here, so bear with me for just a second as I sort this out. So machine-based systems that make inferences Sometimes we call them predictions. They are not recommendations, decisions that create new content based on input that's received in them. These systems can be variously static or iterative. They can be variously dynamic and adaptive. And that would sort of cover the current, I think, landscape of AI, even anticipating that there will probably be many different ones in our lifetime as well. And next slide, please. So, I share that definition because it's, the OECD has helped us to, I think, distill, and that was derived from the OECD, a definition that sounds very simple, it's 2 sentences or so, but for something that's like completely complicated, right? Seemingly simple, software, hardware, math, statistics, but tools that are already having broad impact on society and that are creating and will create new dynamics in the world that are both in the present and in the future. So these are just some clips, some headlines over the last year, some of which you may have seen: economic displacement, national security risks, unhealthy emotional attachments, scam, fraud, and harassment, deep fakes and disinformation, current day harms, including other current day harms, including facial recognition technology gone wrong, profound organizational security risks, cybersecurity risks, the diminishment of personal privacy through data leakage from generative AI, and more. So certainly over the last year, many of us, but certainly in that sort of, I think, very intense reporting period from the end of November of 2022 until the middle of 2023, these kinds of headlines were a constant companion. So, with that kind of bad news, sort of why are we here and why do we care? Like, what's at stake? So next slide, please. So we're here because, we think that there are some potential extraordinary benefits. There could be benefits in science and discovery, so just, basic material science, the ways that we think about the building blocks of the universe. So a great example here, of course, is AlphaFold, which is an AI program developed by Google DeepMind that predicts protein structure and could potentially lead to novel developments like tackling antibiotic resistance, combating plastic pollution if we're able to design plastic-eating enzymes, and they could even be used in gene editing and for cures and diagnostics. Next slide, please. We care also because there are some implications for issues around accessibility. So there's Waymap, which has been around for several years now, a London-based AI company that has a product that is helping visually impaired people and others navigate their surroundings. It works indoors, it works outdoors, it works in underground, and it has far-reaching potential, and it is already improving people's lives. And of course, we care because of the potential for agriculture. So this is just one headline story that I pulled that's really about crop yields and about the ability to use AI to surveil how agriculture is doing and the potential to feed the world, which is something that we still very much struggle to do. So lots of potential for good. AI for good has become a mantra in the UN and elsewhere. But AI for good is not inevitable. And left with where we are now and the kind of governance space, what we have are those headlines that I began with. And so I want to think about today together and talk about what we need to do to create and steward the outcomes that we want with AI. And I want to suggest that I think we know this, but I want to just say it explicitly, that any of the good outcomes that we want or anticipate or expect could come from the use of artificial tools and intelligence tools and systems are not inherent to the technology themselves, right? We must use, steward, and create guardrails for the technology that allow these things to be the case. Next slide, please. So in reaction to the sort of challenges and the sort of hue and cry around AI, there's been lots of attempts to create policy, to create guardrails. There's been extraordinary efforts at AI governance, as Professor Patterson suggested that the Boston Global Forum is already involved in. But early on, you saw with the introduction of ChatGPT, you saw that Italy invoked the General Data Protection Act, the GDPR, to sort of stop the sort of creep of that product into the society, and that kind of contest, that debate is still ongoing. We had an EU Act at the end of EU AI Act at the end of 2023. Of course, the UN is engaged in global governance work that will come to fruition by the time of the next General Assembly. And the US Congress has various policy processes afoot, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. So the question is, with all of these processes, I didn't need that slide yet, but okay, getting a little ahead of me. I'll call you when I need the slide. How do we get there, right? In the midst of all of this activity, it would be easy to lose focus on the outcomes that we want and get caught up in the governance. Next slide, please. Instead of reaching, and so what is the right way to regulate AI? This is a piece that I wrote in Foreign Affairs in January. I did not choose the title. As we know, editors choose the title, but I will take credit for giving us now the right way to regulate AI, haha. But one of the things I offer here in the article is that we do need, I think, 21st century frameworks for thinking about the governance of emerging science and technology, but that these frameworks are really sort of conceptions that I think often will need to bring us back to the fundamental outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And I think that we've spent a lot of time in the technology policy space thinking about governing the object, right? A lot of our science and technology policy is about regulating spectrum, or regulating telephones, or 5G or 6G as the case may be. You can think regulating the railroad. So we've thought very much about the object. It doesn't work for AI for a few reasons, and much of my conversation this afternoon will be about that. But one of the reasons I mentioned in the very definition of AI at the beginning, it's an iterative dynamic system, right? And so you can't use a regulatory strategy that's about an object that's dynamic and constantly moving. So how do we think about that, for example? It's also a challenge because of the different applications and use cases of something like generative AI that is, so-called general purpose, not quite that, but that's what we call it, but has all of these kind of various applications and use cases. So how do you think about the different regulatory contexts, potentially, or governance contexts that these tools might be used in? So I think instead of reaching for 20th century regulatory frameworks for guidance, that we've got to start with a different first step. We need to ask ourselves why we wish to govern AI at all. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And it's crucial, I think, for policymakers, for leaders, for people in civil society, not only to consider what specific threats they fear from AI, and they are considerable, and that's why I began with that slide, but also what kind of society we want to build. AI governance doesn't need to start from scratch, right? It can emerge from the same fundamental vision of the public good that we have articulated for many, many years in American society. Obviously, there's no society whose members will always share the same vision of the good society or a good future, but democratic societies are built on a basic agreement about core values that citizens hold. In the case of the US, at our best, these include privacy, safety, freedom, equality, and the rule of law. Next slide, please. So how do we govern the future is, I think, the challenge that confronts us. And I want to offer two provocations, two answers, two bits of conversation today. The first around democratic participation, and second around policy innovation. So I think policymakers are too often believe that they're constrained in their approach to policymaking, to governing new systems and new dynamics like AI, because we think that the novelty of a project, we're being told by innovators, by VCs, by entrepreneurs that this product is amazing and you've never seen anything like it. And so, of course, we think, well, how could our civil rights law have anything? How could it have any bearing on this incredible, jazzy new technology? And we become, I think, trapped in a false sense that new technologies always need specific new laws, right? Our instinct too often becomes to devise new governance paradigms for each new technology development. So my argument in part is that we don't need to create the social compact anew every time there's a new technology, Moreover, those of you who work in the tech development space, so there I know at lunch I met some folks who are VCs and founders, know that the space is moving very quickly. Even if that was the right strategy for governance, and I think it's not, there's no way we can create whole new social compacts every time we have new forms of technology emerging in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So how might we govern the future? I offered these two observations. So first, let me talk a bit about democratic participation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So November of 2022, was when ChatGPT was released to the public. Those of you who work in the technology space know that AI has been in our lives for many, many years, including generative AI. But it wasn't until November of 2022 when it went from being a research tool, research tools and systems, to being sort of, particularly generative AI, early development, enterprise, business-to-business tools, to being a consumer-facing product, right, in the form of ChatGPT and then other products to follow, that we had a sort of national, international, public debate about AI, right? Before that, it was the thing in yourself, operating, humming in behind your cell phone that, messed up your text messages with its bad autocorrect. It was the thing that opened your telephone using your face and the like, but we didn't really think about it. It wasn't certainly not part of American public discourse. But then we had this moment. And this moment came with it. This is from an early story. This is, I think, like December 3rd in the New York Times. So ChatGPT is released in, I think, November 20th of 2022. A new chatbot from OpenAI is inspiring awe, fear, stunts, and attempts to circumvent its guardrail. So sense of kind of the whirlwind of that, if you remember going back just not quite a year ago. Next slide, please. So I want to suggest that that there are a couple of ways, that part of the gift, actually, of the whirlwind of the fall of 2023 and the 22 and the winter of 2023 was that the public paid attention for the first time to AI. Many of us working at OSTP, and those of you who teach technology policy or work in engineering in the space of AI, have probably tried for months, if not years, to tell friends, family about these interesting tools and systems, and eyes would glaze over. Nobody was interested. But after ChatGPT, you could talk to people. Like, people could, I think, have a conversation in a different way. I want to suggest that this was a democratic opening, like a tremendous opportunity for the very first time for the general public to feel hailed by conversations about AI. And that is a tremendous opportunity for the governance of AI, because you've got a broader conversation and much more people invested in its outcome. By the start of 2023, as we know, it's been reported, more than 100 million people had reportedly used ChatGPT, and presumably millions others had engaged in some way with some form of generative AI, right? So major sort of diffusion of knowledge about generative AI and AI more broadly, if not usage. And there's some good Pew Research data on that, Research Center data on that distinction. Next slide, please. So this democratic opening was something that we were also trying in our work at the Office of Science and Technology Policy to create, right? Well before, a year or more before the emergence of ChatGPT. We appreciated that these tools were potentially so transformative, so powerful, so impactful to so many domains and sectors of society that there was a responsibility of people working in government to engage the public. And the question was, how do you do that with something that's both so abstract and complicated, as the definition I used at the beginning, sort of deceptively simple, hardware, software, inferences, and outputs, but very, very complicated. And I think with the sense that people think, I can't possibly understand this. I'm not a scientist. This is for those other people who work in that area. And so the challenge that we had and what we set out to do was to create a document about American aspirations for governing AI that was addressed to the American people, right? That was addressed to, a reading level that anyone could understand, that did not include jargon, And that was distilled from conversations, over almost a year of conversation, not only with policymakers, not only with some of the great minds at Harvard and MIT, including some in this room, not only with important and pioneering founders and inventors and entrepreneurs, but also with members of the American public as well. So we had in the process, next slide please, of developing the AI Bill of Rights. In the first instance, we published an op-ed in Wired magazine that included in its last paragraph with an email address inviting the American public to write to the White House with their ideas, their fears, their hopes for the use of artificial intelligence. And we read those emails and engaged in conversation with the public that way. It was also the case that we had a series of roundtables, we had listening sessions, we had all sorts of different ways that people could contact us about this policy stream and about this conversation. And the impetus here was that, our founding Bill of Rights, that the United States has had to reinterpret rights over its entire trajectory, and that, we created powerful government, and that powerful governments need powerful checks. If we think about AI as a powerful tool and including a tool that will be engaged in government, how do we want to think about checks on that? What do we want it to look like at its best? And how do we want to prevent it from operating at its worst? Next slide, please. So that process led us to the distillation of 5 principles with related practices. Fairly common sense, actually. AI systems should be safe and effective. That one should be protected from algorithmic discrimination, that people should have data privacy, that there should be notice and explanation, meaning certainly in consequential use cases that are consequential for your life, that you should know that an AI tool or system is being used, and that you should have an alternative or a human fallback. So again, particularly when consequential decisions, employment, housing, others are being made about your life, and you should be able to ask how that decision was rendered, and you should be able not only talk to a chatbot, but to talk to a human being about that. We thought this was the very least that the American public, and this is what we heard from the American public, at the very least that we should be leading and framing our work. So this was released, the AI Bill of Rights, both these principles and the principles are followed by more than 70 pages of practices, actual things that people in business, people in research, and industry were doing, auditing, risk assessment, during the stage of design, during the stage of development, during the stage of deployment. How are they doing it? How are they thinking about doing it? Demonstrating variously that taking these aspirations, these principles, and operationalizing them, beginning to implement them, was already happening in American society, and was possible to do ultimately at scale. Next slide, please. So since this time, so we released again this document in October of 2022, a month before ChatGPT was released. So there was a significant Biden-Harris document on AI and AI policy in advance of the release of ChatGPT. There's been a sort of flowering that's been fascinating, and I'm just naming a few here, of AI bills of rights in states around the United States. California has a bill about civil rights that's advancing the AI Bill of Rights in California through the sort of civil rights regulation in that state. That was originally introduced last year. It's been reintroduced this year. And has good hopes, I think, for passage. Early on the scene was Connecticut. So by June of 2023, Governor Ned Lamont had signed a Connecticut bill asking, mandating state legislators there to advance an AI Bill of Rights for the state of Connecticut. And if you follow Connecticut politics or policy at all, you'll know that they've recently introduced, in addition to a Connecticut AI Bill of Rights, legislation that is seeking for the first time to make some of the principles of the AI Bill of Rights binding for industry as well. And then Oklahoma, next slide please, I want to tell you about, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. So it's a little hard to read. I'll read some of this to you. So, you know, Connecticut and California, we think about, I think, as, you know, predominantly, well, California certainly, but Connecticut, mostly blue states. Here in Oklahoma, a Republican state legislator introduced the Oklahoman AI Bill of Rights for Oklahomans. So red state and Republican legislator, and it takes up from the principles of the AI Bill of Rights and expands these. And you know, I was very pleased to see, you know, this policy or this bill, and in particular because it has the same sort of common sense tenor. You know, no one wants to have an automated system discriminate against them. No one wants to have their privacy violated. You know, these are significantly bipartisan issues. The right to know when you're interacting with artificial intelligence. And this one includes also the right to be able to rely on a watermark or some other form of information to know that you're using AI. All right, so for me, these are sort of outgrowths of the kind of democratic opening that came, or the policy opening and the democratic opportunity that came when AI governance became a conversation not just for people like us in the room, but for the general public. And when you were able to convey and communicate to people in language that they understand what the stakes and the potential benefits of these, you know, potentially transformative technologies and systems might be for their lives. So related to this, let me say a little bit about public empowerment. Next slide, please, and then you can move forward to the next slide. Okay. So picking on Eric Schmidt here, but he's not the only one, right? There's a lot of conversation in tech policy space that says only technologists can make tech policy. You know, the people couldn't possibly understand. It's so complicated. And I started with the AI Bill of Rights and the sort of state level efforts related to that, because people do precisely understand the stakes of this. They can't tell you what a transformer is. But they can't tell you, you know, what the GPT of GPT means, but they can tell you very much what these laws, what these tools and technologies might mean for their life. So, you know, I don't think that we have to, you know, believe, as Eric Schmidt has said in an interview with Fortune and also elsewhere, that you know, that we need to leave tech regulation, tech governance only to Silicon Valley. Next slide, please. And we saw a great example of this last summer with the Screen Actor Guild strike in the United States and the Writers Guild strike. So, you know, I think, you know, I know screenwriters and I have actors in my friend circles and family circle, and none of them would claim to be an expert at AI. In fact, they're among the people that would say, like, I don't know what you're talking about. But what was so powerful about what I think is the first ever strike around artificial intelligence and what it might mean for these folks' work is that they understood it at the level for how it mattered for their lives, right? And so you can see it in some of the signage. These are from protests during the strike. No dental clones, no digital clones, we are human. So part of it was at stake for actors was the use of their images, of their voice to create digital humans, right? Not only of them as individual actors, but potentially using historic data of performances of actors to create training data, to create new kind of digital personas of people who never actually existed. So not only sort of digital clones of actors themselves, putting them out of work, but, you know, a potential whole industry of a kind of artificial performance. So I think the labor activism and the work of, you know, and the worker empowerment of the Screen Actors Guild strike and the Writers Guild strike really showed us how workers were beginning to voice concerns about being used, you know, to duplicate their likeness, and concluded both successfully with both strikes having provisions that constrained the studios and executives' ability to use AI in the workplace. So I think one or both of these contracts only go until 2026. So that'll, you know, that's like a millennia in AI time, and so the technology will have changed quite a lot. And it'll be interesting to see how it's renegotiated. But I think that, you know, there was something about that moment of releasing to the public ChatGPT, which I think, you know, arguably could have been done much more responsibly with much more preparation for society, but, you know, we are where we are, that allowed these people, these workers, these non-technologists, to be able to have a conversation about what they thought the stakes were. So I think potentially very important. Next slide, please. So let me make a more wonkish turn, next slide, please, and talk about policy innovation, which has been one of the more, one of the more fascinating, I think, takeaways from my time working in Washington, because as I soon learned from, so Alex Pascal, who's here, was one of my great policy teachers. My time working in the Biden administration, just over 2 years, was my first ever time working in government. And you go into Washington and there's this transition and it's, you know, it's a pandemic and there's, you know, all hands on deck and there's a lot to do. And you have from the campaign and from the transition and from the president, you know, this sort of mission. You have all of these tasks that you're supposed to do. And then you go to meetings and the answer in every meeting is no. We're not doing that. We can't do that. Like, we don't have the budget. We don't have the votes. We don't have the right. And so the work that I found so fascinating in every meeting was like, how do you get to yes? Like, how do you get anything done when you have a Congress that doesn't work, when you have, you know, all of these things. So policymaking is like, you know, like creating the art of the possible out of like meeting after meeting after meeting where the answer is no. And so I think with AI in particular, it's become an interesting space to think about policy innovation because of some of the things that I started with, the ways that we think about AI in the space of governance and regulation. We don't understand it. It's too complicated. We couldn't possibly regulate it, right? So not only is it no in the policy space, it's like, we don't want to touch it, or if we do touch it, we obviously need like to build a whole other new enterprise around it, right? So I want to offer kind of a few strategies of policy innovation, both that we used working in Washington and that I think are important, not only for this moment in AI, the moments in AI that are coming behind it, and all of the other, I think, kind of emergent dynamic technologies that are going to be increasingly coming out of the private sector and not out of government. So if you think about the sort of tradition or the arc of R&D in American society, so much of it has been in government first. Like you can think about Mariana Mazzucato's important work about the emergence of the iPhone, right? And how it emerged from DARPA and these various kinds of projects. With ChatGPT, you know, the transformer was built at Google, right? You know, so there might be some pieces, there might have been a graduate student with an NSF grant along the way or something, but we've had a real shift in the R&D ecosystem. And so we're going to be having forms of technology that government hasn't played a role in and can't necessarily anticipate in the sort of regulatory space, right? And so that means we need to sort of also think anew about that. So one of the strategies, I think, is to return to first principles, and I'll say more about this, you know, this to a fundamental vision of the public good. Not freak out about the technology or get giddily excited about the technology, but think sort of, what do we want this technology to do in the world? And as a policymaker, what do we want it to do for the American public, and what do we need to do to make sure it does this thing rather than that thing, right? And sometimes that means that, believe it or not, existing laws, rules, norms, and standards apply, right? Lena Khan, the chair of the FTC, had said it really well. She sent out a memo, I think last year, where she said, you know, if you discriminate with AI, it's still discrimination. If you commit fraud with AI, it's still fraud. And so, you know, we have sets of clusters of tools and levers already at our disposal. And I think that second bullet point is so important for part of the knock that government gets with regards to regulation, which is like so regulatory lag, so slow, so slow. Part of the slowness is when you think you've got to create the social compact anew, right? But if you can say, we've got this lever already, we know how to deal with this issue, then you don't have to spend a lot of time creating new law, new policy. You can actually pivot and use the law and policy that you have in innovative ways, right? And then it is the case, of course, that sometimes new laws and policies may be required. Next slide, please. All right, so on the point that I was just making before about sort of anchoring in, you know, at the fundamentals, and also sometimes using what you've got. I offer just one interesting example, which was about a month ago, the UN Security Council, or the UN Assembly, passed a resolution about AI governance that was introduced by the United States. It was passed by all 193 member states, and it had 123 member state co-authors. Those of you who even follow barely multilateral politics know that that's unheard of. Like, there's like literally nothing that we agree on in the UN. And so to get all 193 member states to sign on was extraordinary and quite a feat on the part of the leadership of Ambassador LTG and her team at USUN. So what does this say? This resolution? It says that uses of AI tools and systems should abide the UN Charter. That uses of AI tools and systems should abide the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and that the UN should encourage uses of AI tools and systems that help us reach the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Which we're supposed to reach by 2030, and we are woefully behind upon. And so this is an example of sort of anchoring with the SDGs, like what is it we said we're trying to do? What are the things that we said as a global community that we are trying to do for humanity? And if AI is going to help us get there, how are we going to do that? And also going back in the UN context to the very charter of the UN, right? And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that says things like, you have a right to science, you have a right to participate in the way that we make policy around science, and the discovery, the participation, the creation of science, and the like. So that is the context in which we are doing the work. The blue image is the cover of the interim report that the UN High-Level Advisory Board that I serve on released in December. As I said early on, we convened for the first time on October 27th. This interim report came out around December 18th, right? Which is like breakneck speed for any kind of multilateral work, and we were very proud that we got something that we thought was of substance and also that had new ideas for thinking about global governance along the way. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the UN process. It's attempting to have a globally inclusive approach, and the body includes, as I said, folks from all over the world, including considerably from the global south, and is trying to consult widely and offer recommendations about gaps in global governance that the UN can help distinctly to fill, to coordinate, to map, and the like. Next slide, please. So this report that came out in December made a few assertions. AI should be governed inclusively for the benefit of all, should be governed in the public interest, should be built in step with data governance and the protection of a data commons, should be universal, networked, and rooted in adaptive multi-stakeholder collaboration, including industry as well, and should be anchored in the UN Charter, international human rights, and other agreed upon international commitments. So number 5 now has already been instantiated last month in the General Assembly resolution. Next slide, please. All right, so let me talk a little bit about a few more examples of policy innovation. So as I've been saying, policy enables, it's a way of enabling the desired future states that we want for society. And that policy innovation is creates the conditions of possibility for these desired future states. Next slide. So one example of this is an outgrowth of President Biden's October of 2023 executive order on AI. So one of the many mandates of this 111-page document, which I think is the longest executive order in American history, mandated the Office of Management and Budget, which is part of the Executive Office of the President, to create new policy around advancing governance, innovation, and risk management, and agency use of artificial intelligence. So this document is interesting and I think forward-leaning and important for so many different reasons. In part, it establishes that the work of the government should be about advancing both rights and safety in AI. And those of you who are sort of around my age, remember there were earlier times when, and this is a time when government's about to make very significant investments in technology, right? We're about to make, I think, across the federal government, a kind of once-in-generation technology investment across the federal government. And we might compare that to the introduction of the personal computer in government, right? Where there was sort of, each office brought a few computers here and there. We're going to do these systems kind of all at once. And so it's an extraordinary lever for government, this lever of procurement, to be able to say, if we're going to spend, because a part of, if you follow, FT or Bloomberg about the news of the sort of the political economy around sort of generative AI in particular, they're happy for us to play with ChatGPT, but the political economy is really about enterprise contracts, right? Including enterprise contracts with the federal government. So it is going to be a tremendous, not exactly one-off, but sort of, close to one-time opportunity to shape what that ecosystem looks like on the part of the world's largest consumer, which is the US federal government. So what this memo does is offer guidance for that work. And I think is an extraordinary form of policy innovation that, that folks should read and think about. OMB is, probably the wonkiest of the federal government. But this is policy innovation as well. Next slide. So I want to point as well to policy innovation as a way to do governance or do regulation when you're not thinking about the technology as the thing you're regulating, when you're thinking about the outcome, you can think about, and this was part of our strategy at OSTP, not only for AI, but for other things like, what do we want? And this really came from President Biden. Like, science and technology is supposed to do stuff for the American people, right? Like, if you're not doing science and technology policy right, if it's not sort of expanding opportunity to people, not allowing people to sort of start businesses, to have opportunities to educate themselves, to have opportunities to have, better health, better lives and the like. So can we govern, regulate to enable opportunity, to strategically steward science and technology investments, not only to prevent harm, but also to enhance people's lives? Next slide, please. So a great example of this related to AI policy, of course, is the CHIPS and Science Act. So this is an image from the signing of that act in the summer of 2022 that I will just say as a side note that we experienced in the White House as like, this is never going to happen. And then all of a sudden it was like, there's like a bill, there's a law, there's a law. Okay, so CHIPS and Science, right? So you would have heard of CHIPS and Science as being a historic, important law that is actually changing the political economy, the supply chain of semiconductors, right? Notably, mostly memory, different kinds of semiconductors, but in the AI space, importantly, also GPUs. The president was in Syracuse last week, actually announcing a partnership with Micron, which does memory semiconductors, a little bit different. But what was important about that presentation, which was announcing a multi-million-dollar investment in semiconductor manufacturing, in Syracuse, was about all the other things that come with it, right? That the investments from the CHIPS and Science piece, right, are through Micron and through these the public-private partnership, expanding job training for rural communities, for veterans, for mothers returning to work, encouraging the training of students in tribal colleges and minority-serving institutions, mandating that childcare be set up for workers, engaging community colleges and the pipeline for workers and the like. So, the issue here is like, if government is always making investments anyways, how can these be used to steward the outcomes to govern for the future? So potentially, if this goes, as planned, and some, obviously policy does not always, this policy will have helped to put American manufacturing, sort of back in the center of the sort of stack or the pipeline that you need to create AI, and will also be doing lots of good for people's lives and including other things like creating construction jobs and the like. Next slide, please. So policy, and another beat on policy innovation, that governance enables innovation. Like, it's a ballast that provides proactive governance, offers stability and provides a controlled range of motion. Because one of the arguments that we often hear is that you can have innovation or you can have regulation. You can't have them both, and it's going to mess everything up. Next slide, please. So I would just remind you that May of last year, Sam Altman at the Senate Judiciary Committee, as the New York Times, and as I'm quoting them, reported it, quote unquote, implored the Senate to regulate open AI. We know that he would tour Europe the next month and say almost the opposite. But I think what there is an appreciation, I think even among important colleagues in industry, that the sort of landscape of AI research and development is a little scrambled, and that some rules of the road would be helpful even for business. Next slide, please. All right, so this is my last slide. So why I think policy and innovation is important, and how I think all of these, which are current investments, in part that help us govern the future, is that they allow us to fundamentally reject choice architectures that create these false dilemmas for us that I think we are given by the media, we're given also sometimes from PR hype from companies, but actually don't have to be true if we are engaged in engaging the public and what they want these tools and systems to do in their life, and also thinking in innovative ways about how we might do that. So if we engage these together, we can reject choice architectures that create a false dilemma of either pursuing efficiency or ensuring equity, of having safety or innovation, but in that safety and innovation, indeed, and AI are not mutually exclusive things. The charter for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which was stood up in 1976 for reasons we can talk about, which are kind of historically fascinating, includes a phrase that's something like, the job of OSTP is to mitigate foreseeable harms and to advance the potential of science and technology. And that's really what we're called to do in AI governance, to do a kind of anticipatory governance that uses policy innovation, that doesn't try to predict, because we can't, but that tries to use our best guesses, and I think that aligns with the values and the outcomes that we want, and aligns also with using these tools to improve people's lives. And I think if we think about the sort of landscape, the horizon of AI governance that awaits us, that we have a cause for some optimism, as Governor Dukakis would want us to be, because we see that we've already had some success, I think, stewarding the outcomes we want, and that this can be done with prudent policy and an increasingly empowered public. Thank you. Okay, all right. I didn't know how we were going to do it.
Here.
Okay.
And I'll get out of your way. Alondra, thank you so much. I have to run at some point pretty soon. My other job is calling. We have a faculty meeting this afternoon, and I'm presenting. So I didn't have the choice of ducking it. So I'm going to leave. David Swobersig's going to take over here at that point. But we do have, before I go, we do have some individuals online that we wanted to hear from, and then we'll open it for discussion. So Paul, are you with us? Paul Nemitz, Principal Advisor at the European Commission. Paul has been a regular contributor to the Boston Global Forum. You got him on? Then we'll go to Nakayama after that. And Nakayama, if you can hear me, you're on deck. So.
Especially for engaging in democracy and not leaving the regulation.
Nakayama, if you can hear me, you're on deck. So.
Especially for engaging in democracy and not leaving the regulation.
Nakayama, if you can hear me, you're on deck. So.
Not leaving the regulation to miss for engaging in democracy and not leaving the regulation.
Nakayama, if you can hear me, you're on deck. So.
Not leaving the regulation to miss for engaging in democracy and not leaving the regulation.
Nakayama, if you can hear me, house, it acts like Grand Canyon.
We have some very strange
Keep getting these
regulations.
echoes.
Congress to deliver on rules which constrain big corporate power.
There's Paul.
So I would like
Paul, you'll need to start over again.
This is very, very important. I would say we also share the challenge of finding the right way of regulating in the 21st century in light of technologies, but also business models which move fast. Our answer in Europe is not to say that the law cannot do this because it's too complex, the technology moves too fast and so on, because after all, we have a long history also in the United States and in Europe of regulating the behavior of the most complex object, so to say, which is actually the subject of the human being. We regulate in democracies through our laws the very fast mind-changing and the very flexible and very innovative actor, which is the humans. So I don't think that there's any good argument to be made to say that the law cannot be the right tool. Of course, if it's difficult in a democracy to find majorities, like it is in America, it's absolutely okay to go other ways, and I think you have described brilliantly how President Biden and you and others in the Biden administration have done the maximum possible. But I think all of this can be said without down-talking the law. Because after all, when we talk about democracy, and this is also where we are fully online with each other, I think it's important to recognize that the most noble speaking act of democracy is a law passed by the people. So it's not just about consulting and talking with the people, it's about the decision making by the people and their representatives. And so I don't think it's good in the technology discourse to talk down the law. This is what many businesses do, and you have quoted Eric Schmidt. I think we have to go a different way, and this is what we're trying in Europe, namely to pass the laws which are necessary and to pass them in what I would, and this may sound a little bit counterintuitive, call in a form which is technology neutral. Now, of course, the AI Act, that's why I'm saying it's a little counterintuitive, on the face of it is not technology neutral, and we have a lot of struggles there. And I would just say this on the issue of technology neutrality. If you go one step back, for example, to GDPR, and that would fall under your heading, we already have a law, very soon people will realize that the much more important law, the law which makes much more of a difference to AI, is actually GDPR. You already quoted the actions of the Italian data protection authorities based on GDPR. GDPR can be privately enforced by individuals. That's not the case for the AI Act. And GDPR is always applicable when AI processes personal data. So I would say, in thinking about the law, let's not hang the law for AI, let's not hang the AI Act too high. It is a tortured political compromise. It is certainly not the law which has the biggest impact on producers and users and providers of AI. I would say it's on the one hand GDPR and on the other hand copyright law, as we can also see in America. And let us move forward together across the Atlantic in a way which strengthens democracy, both the type of democracy which I'm fascinated by your presentation today, where you showed that people also, when no law is made, outside parliamentary processes like the protests of unions, the writer's strike and so on, this type of democracy, let's move on with that. But let us also join forces and not talk down the tools of the other across the Atlantic. Let us also try to keep parliamentary and lawmaking democracy working in the age of AI. My work is supported in part by a group which is called the Transatlantic Reflection Group on Democracy and the Rule of Law in the Age of AI, where I assemble scientists, a multidisciplinary group, scientists from both sides of the Atlantic, where we try to agree on principles for AI. We have done consensus manifestos, one on what the legislator should do, and one on enforcement. And the next cycle of work starts in autumn and will hopefully next year lead to a consensus manifesto across the Atlantic on the role of the judiciary in relation to shaping the digital space and AI. And my aim is to continue working towards transatlantic consensus in order to make democracy work on both sides of the Atlantic, because let me end with this. The fact that America is not leading on making laws for high tech, whether on a horizontal law on privacy, whether a law on like the DSA, the Digital Services Act, but also on AI, is of course a problem for democracies worldwide, and it also is a problem for the transatlantic relationship, because very easily the European Union, when we make a law, gets accused of being protectionist. Much would be gained, I think, for the democracies in the world and also for shaping our world in a democratic way if America would be able to come back to the table of those who make laws which are parliamentary and which are binding and therefore can be enforced against big tech. Because in the end, what we are talking about are power constellations in society. And unfortunately, I would say the reality is, without binding laws, the public interest is less powerful than if we have binding laws which are also well enforced. And I hope that your work with many others on the level of the United Nations will eventually also lead to something binding. Let us not be pessimistic about the ability of making laws also on the global level. I have reminded myself recently of how fast international binding laws were made and institutions were set up to control the power of the atomic energy in the 50s, also an American initiative. I've myself been very active in the process to create the multilateral binding agreement on the law of the sea. It took more than a decade. Also, our legislations, they all take 5-6 years, but in the end, we have had the success in making binding laws both on EU level and also globally. And I think that should be an encouragement for all of us when we work towards shaping society in democracy, not to give up the ambition to make binding laws, to speak the most noble language of democracy, which is through law. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Now we're going to hear from Nakayama Yasuhide, who's the former Japanese defense minister. Nakayama?
I think because French, Minister of French.
Nakayama is not with us?
Later. Second part.
I'm corrected. He will speak with us later. Elizabeth Moreno, former French Minister for Gender Equality, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity. Still a little bias on the don't do
Elizabeth, please.
It's natural. Government is the counterforce, market failure.
When you wait, Elizabeth, I think maybe we are first year in our.
Good afternoon, and congratulations again. I'm David Silverswag. I'm a professor at the medical school. I'm a physician scientist, a brain neuroscientist, behavioral neuroscientist, and psychiatrist and neurologist. And usually in Boston Global Forum discussions, you might hear a talk from me about the brain in AI and ethics and so forth. Tuan and I talked, and this is not the afternoon for that. This is more the afternoon for the societal policy, governance, and transcending governance issues. I will say a couple of quick words, and then we'll get on with the session. If I were to have spoken with you today, it would be about the notion that at the end of the day, evolutionarily, the human brain mind is what makes us who we are. It is what makes AI, and it is what, in interaction with AI, will produce either a dim future or a bright future, or probably a bit of both, as we've heard. The purpose of understanding the brain in these contexts is to be able to understand both the pro-social and the antisocial impulses that accrue and that can affect how people, including bad actors, whether they be governments or individuals or groups, may utilize these technologies or develop these technologies differentially. And also to be able to understand how the brain's executive functions work that are more recently evolved that can help us to address in a more pro-social way and to decrease polarization. The advent of this technology and the applications of these technology towards human well-being, and therefore we are working on a natural AI initiative to be able to really understand how human brains interact, how human brains and AI can interact, and how emergent functions in complex systems can act for good rather than for ill in terms of human well-being and the societal level. So with that said, the discussion this afternoon is the platform for AI, democracy, and humanity. What I'm going to do is briefly describe the titles and who's speaking so I don't have to come up and bother you between every talk, and the speakers can come in succession, and then we can have a discussion at the end. First, you're going to hear about Generative AI for Pro-Democracy platform by Sandy Pentland, Lily Tsai, and Robert Mahari from MIT. And Sandy, as we know, is a pioneer in these areas. Then we'll hear from our special guest, Ami Fields-Meyer, former senior policy advisor at the White House on resilient democracy in the age of AI. Thank you. Then we'll hear from Tuan, who we need to thank again for all of this, and Nazli Churi from MIT on sovereign data knowledge platform of AI, how we can curate for good, and then on the ethics of that in the sovereign database platform for AI by Jeff Saviano from the Harvard Center for Ethics. Following that, Generative AI for AI World Society, From Imagination to Action, by John Weaver, founder and CEO of MIT Imagination in Action, and the Chief Innovation Officer for the Boston Global Forum. And finally, Collaboration to Build Data Sovereignty Knowledge Platform for AI. David Hall is going to be speaking with us to round it out, CEO of AI and health organizations and a key innovator in this area. So, Sandy, please take us off.
So I'm going to be brief here because we're running a little bit behind time. So I like to think of AI as just one more wave in a long chain of things. The physical world and evolution constrained humans to grow into a species that is social. So we tend to collaborate in groups of like 150, according to Dunbar, in traditional ways. But even you see that structure today. And traditionally, these tribes would come together into clans or somewhat larger things, which varied up to about 1,500. And we talk sometimes about social capital, and there's two types of social capital that people typically reference. One is bonding, which is with your smaller group, that helps you establish cultural norms and ways of things working. And then there's the bridging capital, which famously is the source of much innovation and of interaction between larger groups and a way to move our society and the race forward. However, it's limited by these numbers. It's limited by the physical distance of traveling and the difficulty of that. It's limited by communication. And so human history has been one of trying to transcend these physical limits. So there were original marks about number of sheep in Samaria, those little triangle marks. That was an attempt to convey something over distance that was memory. I saw a program recently. Egypt had spreadsheets to help build the pyramids. Obviously, they weren't computer spreadsheets. They were on papyrus, but they wrote down what was needed where, and they tried to add up the sums and things like that. So it was not so different than the things we see today. And then, of course, there's a long series of other inventions. Dual ledger accounting was a huge invention by the Medicis that enabled error correction and detection of fraud in trade. We have printing, of course, and then radio and TV and the internet. All of those are wonderful attempts to try and transcend the limits of our physicality, but they also brought with them generally several bad things. One is they tended to centralize power. If you could coordinate over long distances, you could coordinate armies, you could coordinate rules, you could make laws that applied uniformly. And what that did is that marginalized other communities and led people into bad acts of various sorts. Another thing is that those sorts of systems that are sort of ubiquitous like that and uniform, beyond just marginalizing communities, are not the most efficient way to do things. You need to have variation between communities to be able to discover better ways of operating and to be robust to unexpected changes. And so they come with these sort of drawbacks. And the recent histories of AI are very little different. So just to sort of recount the waves of AI hype and winter, in the 50s, a lot of the emphasis was on something that was called optimal resource allocation. It won a Nobel Prize in economics. And that was what the Soviet system was built on, as basically a linear solver with constraints. And we know how well that the Soviet system turned out. It turns out you have to have good data and you have to know what you want to be able to use these techniques. But that wave of AI was not a failure. It is still today the most common computation that happens everywhere in the world. It's a way of solving little constraints. We never think about it. It's not visible anymore, but it's there in your spreadsheets. It's there in everything. The next wave of AI that people talk about is expert systems. So we sort of learned that, yeah, the math won't do it, but maybe there are rules that humans came up with, and we'll codify those and make systems that do that. There's a lot of hype and venture capital, and then it all sort of fell apart. But every enterprise system, every governance system of banks and hospitals and stuff has at its heart an expert system. And that actually brought greater efficiency, but it also decimated our communities because it was uniform. There was no variation. So our communities today, for instance, don't have local hospitals, don't have local banks, don't have local control over many things. And the famous book about bowling alone is perhaps largely caused by this usurpation of power by centralized authorities. In 2000, you saw harvesting of data, doing maximal estimation of things. And this is where Google came from. This is where Amazon came from. And you see these types of things in the feedback mechanisms in social media, and that's responsible for these overly loud voices that are the source of so much misinformation and so much distress in society. And today, of course, we have a new wave, which is, hey, we're not just going to look at the links between things. We're not just going to look at the explicit data. We're going to look at everything that's online. raising copyright problems. But, you know, there are ways of dealing with that. But what you see is, you see again this sort of danger of uniformation. So for instance, in other countries, they're really worried about the fact that current AI reflects English and American values. Or, if you're in the Chinese sphere, Chinese and Chinese values. And there's very little choice in between. So what can we do about this? Well, we're doing a couple of things. And I will ask some of my collaborators to talk. One is, together with Condoleezza Rice, Nate Pursley, who some of you may know, Eric Bernolson and myself, we're editing a series of volumes that we hope to be like the Federalist Papers, imagining the future with the recognition that there will be AI, that there will be all these digital things. Things that will be about everything. How are we going to have the society we want? And so we've asked people like Dr. Nelson to come and contribute to this, to help us sort of envision the future. Because unless you can envision the future, you won't be able to get there. The other thing is we have lots of collaborations in science, and you're going to hear from two of my collaborators. The first is Robert Mehari, who is a JD from Harvard and works with me on his PhD, but he also works with the lead author of the EU AI Act, which I think is really important. And, you know, of course, we also pay attention to what Cam Carey and the Brookings Institute does. And we also talk with people in India and other places, Singapore, and see what they're doing. He's going to talk a little bit about regulation of AI and what some of the thinking is in the EU and in some of these other places, because I think their experience is telling. And the other is Lily Tsai, who was head of the MIT faculty and political scientist, and she's going to talk, I think, about the need for systems that promote deliberation and the need to preserve the agency of individuals. And so with that, let me just sit down and let Robert and Lily come up.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Sandy. So, like Sandy said, I'm doing a JD PhD. I completed my JD at Harvard, and now I'm wrapping up my PhD at MIT. And really, the focus of my study is computational law, so kind of leveraging advanced computational techniques to improve our understanding of legal systems and also the way we deploy regulation. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is regulation by design, which is this research theme that's emerged where what we're trying to do is to embed regulatory objectives into technical systems. And this isn't really a new thing. So if you think back to, say, the invention of the passenger elevator was invented actually in Vermont, close by a man named Elijah Otis. No one wanted to get into the elevator because they were maybe understandably scared they'd fall to their deaths. And so what Elijah did is he went to the New York World Fair in 1853. He stood on his elevator platform, he cut the rope, and nothing happened because there were ratchets installed inside of the elevator that stopped his fall. And this is kind of an example of safety by design, right? Embedding a safety mechanism into a technical system. This is really quite an obvious thing to do. But what we'd like to do is to take it one step further and to say, well, can we embed other types of important policy objectives into technical systems? And the nice thing about AI is it really lends itself to this because fundamentally the way we design AI systems is we define an objective function and then we kind of iteratively optimize the technology to meet that objective function. And it's really all we have to do is to place the regulatory objectives we care about into this objective function. And there's obvious reasons why we might want to do this. On the one hand, the AI supply chain is fairly complex, fairly fragmented, and what that means is that we have kind of series of steps that are taken from data collection and preparation to taking that data and maybe annotating it, collecting it into different kind of like meta packages, then training foundational or general purpose models, and then finally folks taking those general purpose models and actually deploying them. And what it means is that the final deployers actually have very little influence on what is inside of the models. And so if we want them to comply with regulation, ideally, we would have some sort of compliance installed in those models when the kind of final level of developers get access to them. Second is we worry about quashing innovation. We want to make it easy to comply with AI regulation. And so the more we can do to kind of automate and streamline that process, the better for lower resource players. And finally, from a kind of more business perspective, the fines under the various emerging AI regulations are really quite stiff. And so there's kind of an economic incentive to try and make sure that you comply as much as possible, ideally in kind of a technically rigorous fashion. So just by way of example, the EU AI Act foresees fines of up to 7% of global revenue. So this is, something to pay attention to. So I'd like to walk you through a couple of examples of how regulation by design might look, some of the technical research questions that we're raising, and then kind of wrap up by what we're actually doing in the real world about this. So the EU AI Act is a risk-based framework, right? So that means that depending on the level of risk posed by your AI system, we have different kinds of compliance obligations. But the problem is that the general purpose AI models, things like ChatGPT, things like Google's Gemini, Claude by Anthropic, they kind of lend themselves to all sorts of things. And so you can use them in very innocuous ways, but you can also use them for quote unquote high-risk applications like education, like employment screening. And so the research question is, can we design AI systems that actually know whether they're engaged in a high-risk application of AI, and then either alert the developers to that fact, or even better, they just go ahead and comply with the relevant regulations in kind of a flexible way. The second area is data quality. So if you are a high-risk application under the EU AI Act, then you have a responsibility to make sure that your training and evaluation data is, first of all, correct, free of errors and representative. And if we have machine learning practitioners in the room, they'll kind of look at that and say, well, that's impossible to do when we're training a machine on all of the internet. How do we make sure there are no errors? And so that begs the question, what do we really mean by that? What do the regulators mean by that? And what kind of benchmarks can the technical community come up with to ensure that we have the right kind of data quality in a way that we can measure it ideally? And what can we do about the pipeline that creates all of this AI training data to try to make sure that we comply with the regulation and have high quality data? Another requirement under the AI Act relates to reinforcement learning. And so there the fear is that we have an AI system that's actually unbiased, that's performing the way it should, and we deploy it onto the world, and through the user feedback it gets, it starts kind of veering off course. And so there's a responsibility for deployers of such systems to ensure that no biases develop. This is really quite hard to do, right? How do you monitor a system post-deployment? And again, there's a host of research questions about how do we design benchmarks that we can actually deploy in an iterative fashion so that even after the AI system is out on the market, we can kind of constrain its behavior. Moving away from the EU, in the US we have copyright infringement, which is kind of a hot topic and a hot button issue for AI. And there have been repeated attempts by technologists to say, well, we can just measure the similarity between outputs and inputs and make sure that there's no copyright infringement. It's not quite that simple, because the way that we assess copyright infringement includes something called substantial similarity, which is kind of this murky, fuzzy concept that is ultimately going to be assessed by jurors. And so what we're interested in is saying, well, can we get machine learning models to actually learn the way that a juror would assess substantial similarity? So rather than trying to rely on technical mechanisms and metrics, can we learn the kind of human fuzziness and the subjectivity, and then use that to try and steer us away from copyright infringement? A final example of regulation by design, there was an interesting case in Canada where a chatbot deployed by Air Canada actually issued a customer a refund that the customer wasn't entitled to. And the court ruled that if the information that is on Air Canada's website is something that Air Canada is responsible for, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't also be responsible for the output of the chatbot. And so regardless of whether or not the chatbot's output was actually in agreement with the kind of policy that Air Canada has, the customers were entitled to a refund. And so what we're exploring is the ability to design kind of custom screening policies. So forget about regulation imposed by government, but can we as a company, for example, deploying AI systems, define a set of policies that those AI systems accord with and kind of constrain the behavior? And so kind of to wrap up, what are we doing about this? This is all like exciting research. As Sandy kind of signaled, we're working really quite closely with folks in the EU Commission, including the key people who've deployed the EU AI Act. And what we're trying to do is to go through all of the EU AI Act and essentially establish a technical research agenda, and then to translate that to the technical research community and say, look, like, it's great you're building AI systems, but here's like 100 problems we need to fix if you want these systems to be safe and deployed worldwide. We're going beyond the EU, of course, so we're also working with a host of kind of regulatory agencies to try to understand what are the kind of technical metrics and standards we can define to make it easier to comply with regulations that are forthcoming. So we've met with the World Bank, the CFTC, we've given presentations at the New York City Bar Association, we've written comments to the US Copyright Office. So we're really trying to kind of go broad. Beyond Europe and the US, we're also working with the Singaporean Privacy Agency, where the requirements are actually quite different, and it's interesting to work in that context. On the technical side, we have a couple of research projects that we've launched that aren't directly on point with regulation by design, but kind of capture the spirit. So we've convened an effort we call the Data Provenance Initiative with, at this point, over 65 collaborators, where we're going through tens of thousands of AI training data sets and figuring out where did they actually come from. Because without having that information about the licenses, about the creators, it's really hard to make informed decisions about how to use the data. And so that was covered by the Washington Post. We have an open source tool that anyone can use, and we're significantly expanding that effort. On the more legal side, I said I was a JD, so I'm interested in these things too. We're building tools to help individuals navigating litigation to find the case law that supports their case in a way that prevents hallucination. So we're really quite concerned that you could have a chatbot companion like this give you bogus case law citations, and then you would look quite poor in court. And so we've developed a series of approaches to kind of make sure that whatever recommendations you get are actually real and based on case law. To wrap up, we think this is kind of an interesting new paradigm for regulation. It's not that new, right? I mean, we're taking the regulation that's already out there, we're just kind of translating it into a set of instructions that can be parsed and implemented by technology. And so, to Dr. Nelson's point, maybe this is kind of an interesting approach to regulating AI and to actually enabling policymakers to regulate more effectively. Of course, it's not easy, it's not a panacea. On the one hand, this requires a fairly deep understanding of technology by policymakers, and we're doing our utmost to try and convey that. At the same time, it also requires a step towards standardization, not just within jurisdictions, but across them. We found again and again that the market for AI, the supply chain, it's super fragmented, it's very international. And so without some degree of collaboration and interactivity, it's quite hard to really intervene in effective ways. So I'll leave it there. Like I said, great pleasure to be here and happy to chat after. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to switch gears a bit from the governance of AI to thinking a little bit about governance with AI. So I'm going to offer some thoughts from work that Sandy and I have been doing on what pluralist societies might need from digital civic infrastructure and what the potential might be for digitally mediated civic engagement. So as Sandy started us off with, humans developed at a time when collective decision-making was limited to small numbers of people with similar concerns. As we sought to coordinate across larger and larger distances, it became necessary to send representatives on behalf of the group. But representatives, even democratically elected ones, don't always share the interests of their constituents. And when they diverge, as we know, opportunities for corruption and elite capture can sometimes open up. With technologies that now enable very large numbers of people to communicate and make decisions on the same platform, we now have new opportunities for digitally enabled direct democracy at scale. Quantitative experiments, sometimes including tens of millions of individuals, have examined scaling, inclusiveness, and efficiency in decision-making via digital networks. And their findings suggest that large networks of non-experts can make practical, productive decisions and engage in collective action. Now, some would warn against technology that could further reinforce the nationalization of politics and political discourse. In the United States, citizens have increasingly turned away from the everyday problems of their local communities. Students who skip school, empty storefronts on Main Street, the level of property taxes. Instead, we've become transfixed by who might run for president, what their family members do, what national politician is currently under investigation, and what case is being heard today in the US Supreme Court. This nationalization of politics, as we know, has led to partisan mega-identities in the US. The cleavage between parties increasingly overlaps with and reinforces socioeconomic cleavages. Liliana Mason writes, a single vote can now indicate a person's partisan preference as well as his or her religion, race, ethnicity, gender, neighborhood, and even favorite grocery store. We now have many reasons, not just a single one, to distance ourselves from those we see in the other camp. And not only do we disagree with their views, but we treat them like the bad guys. Polarization didn't just happen because of social media, but both ideological and affective polarization plays out on platforms that increase the speed and scale of interaction and ramps up the emotional intensity of confrontation. Not surprisingly, some leave in search of spaces with only like-minded people. Others get drawn in and double down on conflict. Neither is good for negotiating disagreement and either coming to a compromise or an agreement to disagree. Both reactions further reinforce the walls between us. One part of the answer might be to revitalize place-based identities and engagement. But it also seems clear that reinforcing local identities should not be the only approach. So many towns and neighborhoods, at least in the US, are now effectively mini one-party states. With the democratic sorting that has taken place over the last 40 years, focusing our attention just on local politics might inadvertently reinforce these local blocs. So we might actually want to break up these blocs with cross-cutting cleavages, the kinds of bridging social capital that Sandy was talking about, to connect people across localities, since many studies suggest that it's connections between these groups and communities that are a major source of innovation and change. Unfortunately, over the last decades, we've seen the decline of churches, fraternal organizations, and other forms of associational life that once served this function. So what we're working on with our research team is building new kinds of intermediating digital spaces, ones that provide some perspective and moderation, ones that focus on shared rather than personal problems, and ones that can accommodate discussion and deliberation at a large, even national scale. Can we design digital civic infrastructure to enable direct democracy for a national public while also dampening the polarization that has come with the nationalization of politics? To do so, we think we would have to solve for the following problems. The first is how to get people to want to engage. People have been walking away, we know, from civic participation for decades, and now they're doing so in droves. The second is how, once we are engaged, how to get people to want to understand the needs and concerns of others, and to consider those concerns as we make decisions that affect all of us. How do we build digital infrastructure for civic engagement that addresses these problems? We think we might need to create new kinds of mediated civic engagement, ones that could make us more comfortable and more curious than we currently are in engaging with people on difficult public issues. Alexis de Tocqueville, who is often quoted in discussions about revitalizing American democracy, talked about town meetings as schools for teaching people how to use and enjoy liberty. Town meetings, as Tocqueville saw them, have become diminished. We no longer attend town meetings at the same rates, and when we do attend these meetings, we certainly do not enjoy them. Many online spaces for public discussion are no better, and some spaces, as we know, are far worse, with people or even bots who are yelling at each other and inciting virtual mobs. These are far from the noisy, sprawling social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit, are far from the ideal of leafy, tree-lined public squares and citizens' assemblies, where we can stand around listening and thinking, maybe doing some people watching and chatting to the person next to us. Given where things are with online political discussions, what could make engagement in collective discussions and decision-making tolerable or possibly even enjoyable in the way that Tocqueville praised? Even in Tocqueville's time, and probably for as long as humans have discussed things, people have lost their tempers and raised their voices. That's why it was important to have the option of standing on the edges of the square or the assembly and watching the spectacle, or being able to retreat there if things got to be too much. One could move a little further away, maybe strike up a side conversation, and just keep an ear out to see if the public conversation might be worth tuning into again. In today's online platforms, we have lost our power to calibrate how close we are to the conversation. We either choose to get on the platform and be confronted with all of the commentary that's on it, or we have to choose not to be on the platform at all. The work of political theorist Bernardo Zacca illuminates the importance of in-between spaces. Zacca's focus is on physical spaces, such as balconies on apartment buildings that overlook the street, and how they can enable what Zacca calls a kind of reserved sociability that strengthens pluralism in democratic societies. When the driver of a car starts honking in the street for somebody taking their parking space, and others start yelling at both cars to stop making so much noise, and maybe a shopkeeper runs out to suggest that maybe one of them goes and finds another spot, spaces such as balconies allow people to come out, see what's going on in public, and see how the drivers and shopkeeper are dealing with this conflict, and figure out whether other people in their balconies approve or disapprove with the efforts. These in-between spaces, such as porches, stoops, courtyards, and lobbies, are interesting to Zacca because they serve a number of functions that are important for living in a pluralist society where there are all sorts of people. The first is a measure of safety and autonomy. Your balcony allows you to engage with what is going on in public, but you are also at a remove. You have control over whether you want to withdraw into your house. You can see the argument that's going on in the street. You can even shout a suggestion down if you want to, but you don't have to get involved, and you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. It gives you the perspective that comes with pulling back and having a bit of distance. You have a bird's eye view, but there's no pressure to do anything in particular. As Zacca notes, balconies offer an unobstructed view over a range of activities, enabling eyes and ears to wander freely. In this regard, they are similar to benches at the edge of a square. We think digital intermediation could help offer this kind of access to what the urban planner Jane Jacobs described as the lively and diverse intermingling and interaction of strangers in the public arena that is at the same time under one's control, at one's leisure, protected by anonymity, and as Tocqueville described, enjoyable. Jacobs thought that the diversity of city life could be wonderful, but only when the city brought diverse people together without forcing them to be too close. When people were forced to be too close, she noted, they tended to withdraw into their private spaces, foregoing interaction with others and becoming less tolerant of diversity. These qualities of safety and anonymity, autonomy and control over one's time, attention, and intensity of engagement, including the ability to step back from within the discussion for perspective on the whole, enable people to process diversity and disagreement on their own terms and learn to tolerate it. This is what we want to design for. While too much intimacy and too much information can be off-putting, online platforms for discussion and deliberation could give those the ability to dip their toes in first, then slowly wade in as they become interested enough to find out what others think, particularly when the platform enables them to maintain a kind of depersonalized distance. Two examples of online platforms that start to illustrate this kind of digital intermediation are the School of Possibilities, an AI-enabled platform for public engagement on school reform recently piloted in Romania by Eric Gordon, a professor of civic media at Emerson College, and the Polis platform, which has been widely used for public deliberation around the world. We write about these in a forthcoming essay, and many of you know Polis well, so I won't expand on them here. But our research team is currently building on these examples to design and test features that would enable the kind of reserved sociability and civic engagement that can best contribute to a healthy, pluralist democracy. Digital innovations, of course, as we've been talking about, also raise questions about how to mitigate potential risks and harms. In a recent paper that we published at MIT in their AI Impact series, our team has written about how important it is to integrate generative AI into these platforms in ways that uphold our fundamental democratic commitments, our social compact, as Dr. Nelson noted, to preserving human agency and autonomy, encouraging mutual respect, promoting equality and inclusiveness, and augmenting rather than substituting for active citizenship. For example, we don't want AI chatbots who nudge people towards more agreement on these platforms just because the chatbots are better at writing in friendlier or more authoritative voices. When we're not aware of these effects or the integration of AI into the platform more broadly, it also raises questions about whether the principles of agency and respect are really being upheld, again, as the AI Bills of Rights that we saw reinforce. Generative AI makes it possible to increase the speed with which groups reach consensus by suggesting the kinds of policy statements and solutions that people might be most likely to agree with. This can be super helpful, but we don't want a focus on efficiency to reduce the kinds of new realizations and creative ideas that emerge from people having in-depth debates. Participants can also become too dependent on AI, leading to a lack of critical engagement with the issues under discussion and with the views and arguments expressed by other individuals. So generative AI needs to help us look for information as we seek to educate ourselves about the issues rather than doing all the work for us. And of course, there's always the risk of over-censorship or differential censorship. AI-based features can disproportionately silence certain viewpoints. Models can have biases due to algorithmic design decisions and the data that they're trained on, and external entities can engage in manipulation. Protecting and preserving minority interests and views remains important. It will be crucial to keep these and other potential pitfalls top of mind. We also argue that creating online platforms that revitalize civic engagement requires two capabilities that are often missing in digital platforms. The first is identity authentication that can ensure that everyone on the platform is a human entitled to engage on the platform. So no bots and maybe no commercial companies. It used to be that knowing someone's identity was necessary to ensure that they actually had rights to participate. Now technology enables us to separate the two so that you can be anonymous, but others can know and be sure that you are a real person with legitimate standing in the community. The data and relationships that we co-generate with others in our economic and social interactions, our bank, our doctors, government, friends, these form our digital identity. These relationships can attest to who we are. And the multiplicity of these relationships means that no one actor can deny you rights associated with your identity. In the digital realm, this kind of community grounding of digital identity is well known to be one of the most secure methods of protecting citizens from malicious attack. Any successful engagement infrastructure must also give us rights over these data and digital relationships, and not just privacy rights, but also ownership and use rights. The dual nature of this anonymity and authenticated identity can enable a new reserved civic engagement that can make us more comfortable with interacting with fellow community members that might otherwise seem very different or foreign to us, and help us increase our tolerance of diversity and pluralism. Second, digital intermediation could help us focus more on public issues and avoid the emotional reactions and personal biases that can cloud our judgment. Such platforms can provide summarizations and visualizations of the overall status of the discussion online in a way that is analogous to watching a town assembly while walking around the edges of the square, or looking down on a heated discussion in the street from your balcony. You can consider the conversation from different vantage points and decide what those vantage points are. You don't have to insert yourself into the goings-on unless you want to, and when you do, you are protected because you can choose to remain anonymous. By giving us control and autonomy over how and when we participate, digital intermediation can help us cool our initial reaction to the conversation and create the emotional distance that enables us to activate our more analytical and logical reasoning modes. So the interactive intermediation that AI could make possible can also help establish the kinds of norms of communication that we would normally use in arm's length interactions with people we don't know very well, but also have no reason to suspect of ill intent. Finally, digital intermediation on online platforms can be designed to take advantage of our natural curiosity and playfulness. And our interests in people watching, eavesdropping, and checking out what others are looking at are important aspects of what makes us human. We need to design digital platforms for civic engagement that help us satisfy these instincts that undergird and strengthen human sociality. And of course, these platforms could be used to improve both local and national public discussion and deliberation. So in sum, we need to develop more of these kinds of digital technologies that can offer new opportunities for civic engagement that uphold democratic principles, as well as make us feel safe and protected, and enable us to look out over the public discussion while giving us control over how much we want to get into it. Only then can we fully use and enjoy our liberty again in the way that Tocqueville thought was so special about us.
Hi, everybody. I love AI policy because it's the only discipline where in the same conversation you're talking about Jane Jacobs and Eric Schmidt all in the same conversation. It's the only conversation where we can have deep discussions about multiple disciplines with equal urgency. I'm really honored to be part of that conversation. I'm honored to be here with Governor Dukakis. I was the student who in Los Angeles many years ago had the opportunity to connect with him, and it was very inspiring then, and it's inspiring now to be in the room with you, and to be here with Dr. Alondra Nelson, to whom I had the privilege at the White House of serving as an advisor, but who is an extraordinary mentor to me and to so many other people who work on these and other issues. One of the best things about working at the White House is that you sort of hear from everyone. Everyone comes through at one point or another. I had the opportunity to work at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and then for about a year as a policy advisor to Vice President Harris, mostly working on issues of AI and these technology governance questions. And so for the last number of years, I've had the opportunity to sit at the table with not just fellow policymakers, but also people in Silicon Valley who are developing these technologies and deploying them, people in academia who are evaluating them, some of whom are in the room, and also people in civil society who harbor some fairly profound concerns about how these AI systems are being used. And what I've noticed in those overlapping, intersecting spaces is that when we talk about AI and democracy, the same core concerns seem to rise to the surface. Deepfake images in campaign ads, voice cloning, robocalls, election mis and disinformation. These threats are real, and they are substantial, and they are deserving of our urgent intervention. And yet, they are fundamentally downstream issues. They are consequences of a system and a society that has failed thus far to adequately grapple with earlier, more foundational questions about how we believe AI should be governed. So there's another class of risks posed by AI to democracy, many of which have risen up in this conversation today that I want to discuss. And I should just say, for the technologists in the room, I'm not one of them, that I'm going to use a lot of terms interchangeably, and please forgive me for saying things like algorithmic tools and AI and automated systems. I mean data-driven technologies that mediate important decisions in our life. First step, I think, in making sure AI supports and does not undermine democracy is to understand AI systems as we do any other form of power in a free society. To conceive of this technology as we do wealth or political influence or media influence or legal authority, which is to stipulate that like any other form of power, AI should not be hoarded, but wielded democratically. It should not be used at a whim, but after deliberate decision-making. And it shouldn't advance the interests of only a select few, but priorities forged by consensus and in the best interests of people. That's how I posit we should think about power, and that's how I posit we should think about AI. So it's in that context of understanding AI as power that I believe we should evaluate AI's impact on our democracy and determine where we need to intervene. A physician diagnoses illness by first establishing the range of normal, and if a patient presents with symptoms, of course, outside of that range, then the patient is sick. So one measure of diagnosing the health of our democracy is considering how close we are to that AI power premise. We know, of course, that our democracy is presenting far outside the range of normal, and that AI tools often are not helping. It should not be normal in a healthy democracy for Black Americans to be arrested and jailed after they are misidentified by facial recognition tools, but it's happening in Michigan and New Jersey and Georgia. It should not be normal in a healthy democracy for local governments to use chatbots, which tell local landlords that they can discriminate against tenants who are trying to pay rent through housing vouchers, but that's happening right now, as of last week, in New York City. It should not be normal in a democracy for us to see almost instantaneous corporate consolidation in the very first months after a new powerful technology emerges onto the consumer market. And it shouldn't be normal to be able to deploy powerful AI technologies to surveil warehouse and hotel workers, to cut their pay, or to fire them, all without a human being ever being involved in the decision. None of that should be normal in a democracy. All of it is corrosive. It's happening to our communities, often without our knowledge, often without our consent. So the democracy is sick. AI is not the root cause of that illness, but we need to be forthright that these technologies often, at this point, are making things worse. So I'd like to offer briefly 3 ideas. I like the idea of provocations. That's a good way of framing this, for where we could train our focus to get us closer to that power premise, for how this power should be wielded in our society to preserve our democracy. The first is that we have to focus on AI's immediate discriminatory harms, the ways that AI can threaten our civil rights. There's been some debate over the last couple of years about whether it's worth investing in mitigations against AI systems that are trained or deployed in discriminatory ways. The argument suggests that there are bigger, longer-term problems like AI's threats to the cyber infrastructure or robots becoming self-aware. I find this debate troubling because algorithmic discrimination undermines multiracial democracy because it breaks that promise of citizenship that Dr. Nelson talked about, that if you participate, you will be represented well, you will be treated well, safe, secure, prosperous. So fair treatment by AI cannot be considered a luxury. Any tool that undermines a person's rights or access to critical services is a threat to democracy, as Vice President Harris, my former boss, said in London last year, an existential threat to democracy. So in practice, this means we need to understand that AI's risks to civil and human rights are measurable, and then we need to invest proactively in tools that can do that measuring. And if systems don't pass those tests, or companies and governments don't use these mitigations, these AI tools should stay on the shelf, period. That is largely where the US government is heading with the most recent OMB memo that Dr. Nelson spoke about. And these systems certainly should not be baked into a bunch of other applications like asbestos that's going to come up later and we're going to realize is toxic. These are questions, obviously, that now lie squarely at the foot of Congress in this democracy. We need to consider a new liability regime, a private right of action for ordinary people. We need to make explicit, as several people have said, that the civil rights that have been hard-won over time continue to apply as AI tools are being used to make decisions. The second area we need to address is the gulf between the priorities and incentives of ordinary people and the priorities and incentives of companies building and using these AI systems. That gulf is quickly growing. Last fall, two separate events happened in the world of AI, but I think we should see them as connected. First, the venture capital firm Sequoia announced quietly that it would stop investing in new large language models. And since around 2021, that firm had poured millions into OpenAI, and by the end of last year, they had decided that they were good. I would posit that a capital market that has unilaterally decided it's done investing in the most powerful technology of our time is not a good sign for democracy or competition. And around that same time, as Sequoia's announcement, the Sam Altman OpenAI drama that we all followed, and if we didn't, God bless you, was unfolding, and we heard all this discussion about how to structure a corporation so that it can do well and do good. This is also a bit of a sleight of hand. It muddles intentions and incentives, and it's a recipe for confusion, and confusion does not favor ordinary people. In our economic system, the bottom line, as we know, will beat out the public interest. That's okay, that's how our system works. That's what we've decided on as a society. There's nothing inherently evil about that. But if we're going to establish effective checks and balances on AI, we need to be really clear that a company, like every company, exists first to serve a profit motive and go from there. This is a question of aligned incentives as much as it is a question of accountability. The people building and selling these AI tools, as we've discussed today, have made a bold, bold, bold claim, which is that AI will eventually be able to solve problems humanity has never been able to solve before in science and in medicine and in engineering and in human productivity. I hope they're right. The time-honored tradition of Silicon Valley wonderkins writing checks they can't cash should give us some pause. But if they are right about the unrealized potential of AI, then we need to incentivize a lot more competition and find ways to get these systems solving problems that are important to the public. If they are right, then we need to have a conversation about getting decision-making about these systems from capital allotment to R&D to deployment into the hands, or at least shared by the hands, of ordinary people, people who are perhaps less concerned with everlasting life and more concerned with improving conditions in this life. People less worried about colonizing the moon and more concerned with using these powerful tools for interests without an immediate commercial upside, like climate mitigation, earthquake prediction, etc. Certainly that means making sure we have an empowered, well-staffed, independent enforcement agencies. We've heard about some of them. But it also means building out public resources to do some of this work. There are some promising initiatives already happening here. The National AI Research Resource, terrible name, great idea, is an idea that would scale up access to research and compute and data infrastructure for folks across society. That needs more money and attention, and we should also keep empowering our public engines of innovation, like our national labs, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, to dramatically scale up their use of AI in responsible sandboxes. The final area I'd offer is to begin to really view tech and AI issues as part of a broader political movement for social progress. Maria Cantwell, the senator, the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, where some of this is playing out, who began her career as a tech executive in Seattle, spoke in an interview with Kara Swisher last week about what she thinks can influence corporate tech interests to take precautions. She said, only bright lines where you say you can't do this or the company will be sued is what is going to get the general counsel and the CEO and the CFO and everybody on the same page. I think that's probably right. And yet, as we speak, these AI companies, and I know this from my time in government, are scaling up their public affairs teams, their government affairs teams. They're building out sophisticated lobbying efforts, in some cases seeking to prevent exactly these kinds of bright lines. It would be a mistake to stake a political strategy on the hope that industry will voluntarily step up and do the right thing. De facto self-regulation, sweeping legal immunity has failed us up until this point. It allowed tech interests of the 21st century to run roughshod over the interests of ordinary people. So the time is now for a dynamic, vigorous, well-organized political movement on tech issues and AI issues. That starts with political education to help people see themselves in these issues, to help people understand that AI tools are linked directly to whether they can access quality housing or education, healthcare, economic opportunity. To move people from the abstract detachment on these issues to a really granular understanding of what these systems mean in our lives for good and for ill. My grandmother needs to know to ask when her insurance premium suddenly goes through the roof with no explanation whether an algorithm may have accessed data she never authorized. My neighbor needs to have the critical consciousness to ask why he's being denied a loan or rejected from a job or getting targeted online in a particular way. My organizer friends certainly have to know enough about automated decision-making and AI to show up at the hearings in the state legislatures where so much of this AI battle is playing out. These steps are what the great educational thinker Paulo Freire distinguished as acts of cognition, not transferals of information in the pedagogy of the oppressed. AI is described famously as operating within a black box, but for AI to work in society, we have to take it out of that box. For democracy to survive AI, indeed for AI to work in a democracy, we need a population, an electorate, a society that is critically engaged. Let me close with something that I didn't know Dr. Nelson was going to say, but that I had planned to quote her on anyway, which is that, and something that she taught me long ago, which is that there is nothing fait accompli about technology's role in our society. We are not beholden to these systems. Each of these tools is programmed and deployed by human beings. We get to decide the way this story unfolds. And that is going to require us to remember that for all the ways AI is new, it is like any power. And it will require us to insist, us in this room, to insist and to demand and to organize and to make sure it is used to keep us safe, to support our highest values, and to protect the rights of all people. Thank you.
So we have great presentation, speech, ideas already today. Wonderful and special, sophisticated presentation and speech from Alondra Nelson. So we are that AIWS, AI Society. From 2017, we try to promote for and apply AI for politics and society, and to build a new model, new democracy for society. And today we are very honored and very delighted to see that a lot of progress from all of our people in this room and outside, everywhere, talk and think and discuss and do for AI governance and new democracy. So I would like to say brief. So after that, my colleague will follow and work and talk more. The first, that is you can see that we need very much data sovereignty and knowledge platform to build AI system. Many systems. But what standard knowledge and reliable? Yes. So from that ideas, we have our team, our board from Boston Global Forum, we conceived it that is a knowledge platform. We have many platforms. That Sandy Group talk about platform, social media for democracy, wonderful ideas. And also we need also knowledge platform and data sovereignty for AI system. So this is, I think, this is for action, the time for action. We have plenty knowledge system and centers in the world, especially in the US, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, and many wonderful and excellent universities with an excellent knowledge system already. So how we collaborate, how we aggregate and integrate together, I think that's the time we need to do together from the world. And collaboration, and not only in the US, but international relations. And Boston Global Forum, we have 4 pillars and very important key countries to do together. That is the US, Japan, India, European Commission, and UK. That we see that is 4 pillars for peace and security in the world today. And also, that is for AI also. So we will do very much based with these 4 pillars. And we will try to do and to connect with government and corporation and of course universities, think tanks to do this initiative. And we hope and we look forward and we are call for all our people today in this room and our community, Boston Global Forum community to join and do for this. And that is our from Governor Marco Dukakis and our people here, so all of us can contribute for this very, very important mission. So now, Nasri, my dear friend and our board member, will continue and Chef Saviano follow and continue. We have dear friend and John Werner and David Ho. Yes, we are try to see how we can do. Yeah, thank you so much. Nothing.
I'd like to thank Tuan for his comments and his observations, and I shall try to be as fast as I can because we're running behind and we have quite a few colleagues still to comment. I'd like to focus on the issue of knowledge in the age of AI. Sorry, better? Down. Better? On the issue, I'm talking about knowledge as a variable, as a fact, etc. No? Okay? And on the salience of knowledge in the AI age, and by that, I mean that knowledge is very important. Of course, data is fundamental, we know that. And of course, data is essential for computational representation, we know that. So essentially, it is giving knowledge a position that, or posture that we have to take seriously and be very careful about the quality that we're talking about. If knowledge is to be the core of a platform, knowledge platform. So I have 3 observations briefly that I will make, and then and with each a quick takeaway. I'd like a comment. I'll start with AI and the global economy, and then AI and the knowledge society, and then finally, really some imperatives for knowledge in any platform. The comment that I'd like to share with you about AI and the global economy is a comment that was prompted by a recent article in Foreign Affairs that I found very, very compelling. And the point of that article is that without a new powerful incentive, a new force, production force, the global economy really will succumb to some of the constraints that are built in. It needs a drive of some sort that we're not mobilizing well enough. And why? There's a list of reasons why, including persistent threats of inflation, including reduced labor supply, including increasing cost of capital, etc. And then the authors argue that the new impetus for making the global economy move as sustainably as possible must be anchored in increasing the value added of anything that we do. So the dilemma is not just reducing the costs, but doing something about the value added. So I conclude from this that AI really is a driver for a knowledge-based economy. We're moving in that direction, but we haven't really confronted that issue as a transition. Reason is that in the past, technology had very little effect on knowledge industries, or affecting the industry of knowledge, so to speak, on law, on medicine, etc. But with AI, we now know that the barriers, knowledge can really, if well mobilized, can really have a major effect on the nature of the systems that we're dealing with, law, medicine, again, and so forth. I don't need to tell you that machine learning, deep learning, etc., has helped us to move in that direction. So I see the takeaway here is that AI really is the opening to the accelerating our transition to a knowledge economy. Second point is, what's a knowledge economy? We know what that is. It is a society where knowledge-intensive activities contribute to the advancements of technology, scientific innovation, and you get this kind of reinforcement, where the element of the value really depends on the intellectual property and the innovation that goes into it, on information and practices, etc. The reliance on intellectual capabilities. Now, I'm maybe overstressing this, but it's the intangible that the elephant in the room for us today is the content and the disposition and the uses of knowledge. And I'm making the assumption that with more and better knowledge, we can accelerate the transition to sustainability. So, the phrase the cliche that comes out of this is creative instruction, not creative destruction, if you remember from the old philosophy days. The takeaway of the knowledge economy is that we already see some of this in the features of generative AI that's pointing to the potential for knowledge. And again, I don't have to give you the list. You know what the list is. Versatility, use of code and software, not just words, low barriers to entries, and so on down the line. The phrase AI assistance is just about everybody's language, lexicon, but it's the content of the knowledge that is being transacted that is, or expanded, that is really quite important to drive a knowledge base for and of the use of AI. Now, my third and final observation, is about thinking about the transition from the notion of a knowledge platform. Platform is a word that's been used today enormously, but I'll restrict myself just to the knowledge platform, to maybe thinking about a knowledge system. And by extending the standard view of knowledge, we know what knowledge is. You can check the Webster Dictionary or any other source that you would like to take into account a cluster of understandings that we refer to as, that I would like to refer to as a knowledge system. And now, please bear with me, because it's blah, blah, yak, yak. It's not exactly day-to-day conversation, but when we think about a knowledge system in the context that I'm suggesting here, we're thinking about an organized structure and a dynamic process that can generating and representing content that is domain specific as well as characterized by diverse characteristics and connections to other domains, that is reinforced by a set of logical connections or logical relationships in the content of knowledge that is enhanced, if you wish, through explicit iteration processes that we can understand, we can replicate, we can modify, we can reject. And all of the above subject to criteria of relevance, reliability, quality, and so forth. Underlying all this is the notion of ontology, structures of knowledge. Now, what I'd like to leave with you here is, as we begin to think about developing the knowledge platform, in my own mind, we're really talking about a knowledge system that has features of, along the following lines: distributive capabilities for knowledge provision. The knowledge can come from lots of other places. Some form of quality management. Of course, this goes without saying. Built-in generativity functions, and those can be observed, restructured, analyzed, etc., as long as we know that they are generativity functions, and an overarching ontology, structure of knowledge. This is my own checklist for what we should be watching for as we bring Tuan's vision of the knowledge platform into operational production, designing and framing it in operational terms. And the reason this is important is because we know data is important. We take that for granted, and we know how to improve, evaluate. I think we know how to improve, evaluate, measure, etc. But we haven't really made a successful transition from talking about data, using data, embedding the value added for thinking about the output being a knowledge of some sort, and the transformation of that knowledge, transformation of that knowledge somehow into our social activities and into the global economy. Thank you for your patience.
You guys are good.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Sadia. What an honor to be here today. Tuan, Governor Dukakis, thank you again. Thank you so much for the opportunity to spend a little bit of time and to share some thoughts with you today. Dr. Nelson, congratulations on the recognition today. I loved so much of your presentation. I particularly loved at the end where you put out this open call for optimism. And it's a question that I would imagine that you, many people here probably get this question too. Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist about this technology? I am an optimist. I've lived my life as an optimist. My glass is half full, but I've struggled with the question because there are dark shadows that are cast by this technology. And it reminds me, and I never knew how to answer the question until I saw this great quote from the wonderful jazz musician Charlie Parker. They asked Charlie Parker once if he was an optimist, and he said, he paused and he said, I'm an optimist who carries a raincoat. And I think that perfectly, and now when I get the question, that's how I answer the question about, am I an optimist about AI? I am, but I'm carrying a raincoat because there are shadows that are cast and there are risks involved here as well. Let's flip ahead, please. My talk today is about the ethics of AI and the work here at the SAFRA Ethics Center, also a role with a research affiliate with Sandy and his team at MIT, and I lead emerging technology at EY. And the question of, let's flip ahead, please. The question that I came to talk about, in essence, we're all here to talk about this. Who will be the guardians of AI in the world? And we think about this as the institutions. Who will be the institutions that that will be our guardians. And of course, we've had so much discussion, and Dr. Nelson, your wonderful remarks about the role of government in promoting democracy and the important aspect of the Bill of Rights. And I believe that as we look around the world, we could, if you'd like, we could go from Algeria to Zimbabwe, and we could cover what every country is doing, but we know that it won't be uniform. And we know that perhaps it won't even be robust. If we look to history of how governments and policymakers have responded with regulation of emerging technology, sometimes governments, this is the reality, it's not my opinion whether this is right or wrong, sometimes governments choose not to regulate. They choose not to heavily regulate. President Clinton did it a few times in the 1990s. He did it with electronic commerce in 1997, issued an executive order essentially calling for, as we talked earlier, about self-regulation. We have examples of it. He did it again the next year with the Internet Tax Freedom Act, and he said, don't tax the internet. I'm a recovering tax lawyer, and tax lawyers like us thought that's why the internet flourished, is because we didn't allow people to tax it. But it's not only happening in the US. We can look outside this, look at China. I would posit that perhaps two of the most important and the most powerful fintech applications in the world came from China, from companies like WeChat and Alipay, and the government gave them 7 years. 7 years they decided not to regulate. They said, we will not regulate this technology. The technology is pretty good, and so we can debate causation or correlation, but they chose not to regulate. Let's flip ahead, and of course there's role for NGOs, civil society, and I won't talk about OpenAI. We've discussed that earlier. Just asked the question, how do you feel about OpenAI as the guardian of the technology for the world? How did you feel a few months ago with what we saw from government? I think we all perhaps feel is that there is a gap. I believe there's a gap. I believe there's a gap in governance that government and NGOs alone will never fill. And I believe also that as we talk about the role of business, there's too much discussion about the big 5 tech companies. And we were in Washington last week, and we were sharing some thoughts with our CEOs and tech leaders in Washington. I want to be careful because I'm not giving big tech a pass. That's not the intent of this, but it's about the other companies. What about all of the other companies that are developing applications? And I've met with representatives of 60 companies, 60 directors, sometimes full boards, sometimes risk committees, and talk about optimism. I came away optimistic. They want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do. With no disrespect, the average director age of Fortune 500 company is about 67 years old. The average director would admit, if they were in the room, that they could use some help in understanding this technology and understanding the risks associated with it. They are craving it. They would absolutely need that help. What we're passionate about, we get so excited. Just imagine every Fortune 500 company all of a sudden has an AI strategy. Financial service companies had it, life science companies had it. Now every company has it. Imagine, so 500 companies, simple math, there are, I'm sure, some great mathematicians in the room. There's average 11 directors for every company, so the simple math says that's 5,500 directors. That's not true, because there's professional directors in the world who sit on like 8 company boards. And so when you look at it, really about 4,600 directors. That's not 10,000 people. That's not even 5,000 people. It's 4,600 leaders. If you're a hockey fan, the Bright Center here at Harvard seats about 3,000 people. You could have an afternoon session for the directors and a morning session. It would only be about 2/3 full, and you could educate the entire leadership of all of the Fortune 500 companies. That has not happened today, and they are craving it. Okay, so what are they doing? What is business doing today? Well, in 2020, there were 80 organizations, public or private, that's it, 80 organizations who announced some adherence to responsible AI principles. It could be principles from organizations like NIST, the Department of Commerce, or from the OECD. Well, that's it. There were 80. Today, that's measured in the thousands of companies. Everybody has done it. The problem is that that's where, for most companies, that's where it ends. And what does it look like? And they adopt principles like they say, we are against bias, and we are against discrimination, and we're all for transparency, and we're all for privacy. The words are vague. The words are incongruent. Sometimes they conflict. Sometimes you can't be all for privacy and all for transparency. And so they're struggling with those questions, and they're craving some sort of a framework. And so that's where we decided, and we started this effort at the Safra Center here because we heard from so many directors that they were craving a framework. So let me just show you what we came up with. You'll tell me in real time, or if it's bad comments, you can do it after the session. But let's click ahead through. So starting from the bottom, the blue layers of this pyramid, and this represents there's actions at every layer. This is meant to be a decision-making framework. We heard from so many boards, we want to start with legal compliance. We want to start with, we want to comply with all, we call those must-do activities. What's level one? Level one represents non-AI laws of the world. We've already talked about wonderful comments about the Civil Rights Act is in this category. GDPR is in this category. Existing laws and regulations that impact AI development and deployment today. It also includes Caremark. Do you know Caremark, the 1996 case of the Delaware Chancery Court, where the court said we need boards to provide risk and oversight of risks of the organization. And did you know that there has been, it's the hardest case to bring against a company is to challenge the business judgment of the board of directors. And for many years, most of the cases failed until a few years ago. You're following what's happening with Boeing. The shareholders sued Boeing because they felt that the directors weren't promoting really the value of the company. And so the court allowed the case to go forward and actually held that the board didn't do enough to protect their stakeholders. It's the first time the court has done that. I believe it's an important decision for AI governance going forward. The Delaware Chancery Court has said we need more from boards. We want boards not only, we talk about serving shareholders and shareholder primacy. Sometimes that butts up against stakeholder capitalism. The court in Boeing said don't forget about stakeholders. Who are their stakeholders? Customers and people on the ground who could get hurt in an accident. The court said you're not doing enough to protect your stakeholders. That will have a profound effect on AI governance. As will, nobody is talking about the McDonald's decision. Is that why we all came here today to brief cases? Where's my friend Robert, my lawyer friends in the room who may put up with me briefing one more case, McDonald's from 2023. McDonald's is a very tough case about sexual harassment claims at the company, but as part of the decision, the court, it was about it's about board responsibility. As part of the decision, the court said, directors come in and out of a company once a quarter. The C-suite is there every day. We should hold the C-suite to the same oversight standard as we do for directors. And so that became incredibly important. So rising above, of course, there's AI laws. This level 3 of the framework we call conscious capitalism. And the more that we look at ethical actions that companies can take, we find that there's a series of things that companies can do that are not only good for the company, but they're good for the world too. Things like if the hand of AI has influenced a product, it's probably a good idea to tell your customer. That'll enhance your reputation, it'll enhance your brand, and it's probably good for the world too. Frankly, there's a lot that is in this level 3 where if boards just knew about these actions, they would take them. And I've been heartened by the feedback that we get from boards, including, one of the last points I'll make, is that so many boards were asking us to go further and say, up through this pyramid, it's about return on investment until you get to the very top. And so many boards ask the question, what if we want to do more? What if we want to do more that's not about a return on investment for our company, but it's about a return for the world? And so there's a series of things. For example, what if you audit an algorithmic impact assessment and you promise to make the results public to the world, no matter the outcome? What if everybody did that? May not be good for your ROI, but it's good for the world. So many companies asked us to develop actions at that level. We talked to one of the leading ethicists here at Harvard, and click one more time. He said, this is a great framework, but you're not going far enough. Don't forget about fundamental human rights up and down every layer of this pyramid, and how important that is. Some of it is codified, but most of it is not. Most of it is not, again, we're not talking about just the United States, we're talking about from Algeria to Zimbabwe. And it's not uniform. So don't forget about fundamental human rights along the way. One more click. We were in Washington. I mentioned the session meeting with CIOs and tech leaders across U.S. government agencies and allied nations, and they looked at this framework and said, we need this too. But what changes is this level 3. It's not about conscious capitalism anymore. It's about mission-driven agency impact. Department of Education, Social Security, Department of Energy, they're building AI systems to improve citizen experience. And so it's about agency impact, but it's also mission-driven as well. So I'll leave you with three points. First, don't forget the opening of whose role is it? Who is the guardians of AI in the world? Let's not let corporate boards off the hook. And let's change the conversation from the 5 big tech. Let's change it to so it's all company development platforms. That's number one. Number two, it was so important to extend and climb this pyramid and implore companies to get higher on the pyramid. And then third, not to forget about human rights at every step along the way. Tawan, Governor Dukakis, thank you very much.
Okay, so this is Governor Dukakis. He came and spoke at my kids' elementary school, and they're still referencing him. They still quote him. And I don't know how often you do selfies, but this was a selfie we did with you. Thank you, for being you. We live near each other, and in the grocery store, my wife sees him often, and he sometimes asks her for advice. And my wife, is very proud that she gets advice from Governor Dukakis, is asked for advice. So some of you know Megan Smith, the third CTO. I told her Ms. Nelson was speaking today, and she was so proud of your work. Is she still here? Yeah, no, I have like a text in Megan fashion, has like 20 things, ask her about this and thank her for this. And she said the body of work that you did represents so much, and thank you. So some of you may know Ms. Harris. She was the deputy counsel in the Obama administration, and her son and my son are on a team together. And for 11 games, I counted this last spring, I would see her twice a week because she supported her son as I supported my son. And she now is the deputy counsel, she's the counsel for a company called Comcast. They worry about amusement parks, they worry about streaming, they worry about making movies. And they did Oppenheimer and did a number of things. And they had a great year. And she's also on the board of Goldman Sachs. So I saw her 2 points for weeks the last 3 months. And I was always asking her about generative AI. Because she is on the side of creatives. She wants people to make great movies. She's excited about this, explosion of tools like no other time. But she's a lawyer. She has to make sure some kid in a dorm room isn't trying to, make an equivalent movie that they're contracting out in Hollywood. And it was just very interesting over the last 3 months to get these 11 data points and get her perspective. And it just reminded me of how dynamic this moment is. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but, I was just thinking about this as I was sitting here. So, I'm a disciple of Sandy Pentland. I've learned everything I know from Sandy. And he talks about it's the data stupid. You know, he's one of the top 5 data scientists in the world. And just think of all the global data, text, video, audio, maybe smell. I don't know, can you data that? But all this data all over the world that LLMs are working with. And when I think of this moment, I think of a tree that's been set up to deal with weather patterns. Its roots are like set up not to fall down. And I feel like this AI is hitting us in a way that like a tree isn't ready for and could easily topple over. And we need to kind of think a little differently than we have before. And as I navigate my world, I see leaders, and some of them are throwing their arms up. I don't know what to do at this moment. This AI is overwhelming. I'm just going to give up. And then I see leaders that say, you know what, I certainly don't know what's going on, but I'm going to be the bridge to whatever comes next. And then there are leaders, and some of them are in this room, that are like, I'm going to create the new normal. I'm going to figure this out. Uber for Web 2 didn't come in like 10 years into Web 2. There's going to be all sorts of opportunities to figure out things to do with this technology. You know, Jeff Saviano said he's a techno-optimist with a raincoat. I think, you know, techno-optimists can do great things, but we do need to be very careful. And, you know, the smartphone, there are 5 billion smartphones, a $100 trillion economy. Think of what people can do as this technology is in the palm of your hands. I know Facebook was trying to make a wing that would go around the earth perpetually to get the last billion who don't have the internet. You know, they also want them to use their product. And I know Google had balloons. But just think of all the people with smartphones, what this technology can do. So I do a science dinner quarterly. I think Boston has, you know, we, in terms of patents and Nobel Prizes, we're off the charts per capita, but we don't collaborate. And the next generation is sort of, you know, they're kept in another room, the kiddie table. So I try to bring a lot of people together to connect. And Sebastian came to one of them, flew in from Seattle. And Sebastian, while he was at the dinner, hit send. Because he's the head of research at Microsoft. And he released, this was Pi Day last year, released ChatGPT 4. And he got all emotional because he just sent out this paper that he had been working on, and he was, you know, one of the early people that knew what ChatGPT 4 could do. And he got emotional because he said 5 years ago he didn't think this was going to be around for another 90 years. He thought his kids' would be experiencing what we're experiencing now. And he said that 60% of his coding right now is done by AI. And he's just thinking about the whole like indentured servitude and the whole kind of moving up in the ranks as a programmer, how that's going to change. And that may be for the good, or that may be for challenges. So I'm part of the governor's AI task force. We're meeting tomorrow. We had one meeting. There's a lot of sub-meetings. A lot of the best in this room are helping with this. You know, I also made a chatbot that this is me. I'm a techno-optimist. And you could connect it to Blue Boy like me. All right. So this is me. I asked myself a question, and I had a dialogue, and it like immediately came up with it. I mean, this is kind of crazy. So I'm not going to play that. And then for my conference, I think I have another video going on, but. Oh yeah, no, this is, yeah, all right, so hold on, sorry, just bear with me, slideshow. Yeah, so the audio is really cool, but I have other videos going on, and I don't know how to turn them off right now. But this is where I am, like Einstein, the Milky Way, and I just took a photo, and I made this video, just as I was sitting here, you know, this is the stuff you can do, you know, and that's not really me, I'm right here, but, you know, that's kind of crazy. So who's familiar with this bridge? You know, Salt and Pepper Bridge, Longfellow Bridge. This is actually the first bridge that connected Boston and Cambridge. And while this building, the Loeb House, was built in 1812, the leadership of Harvard have always lived on this plot of land, even before this was built. And the leadership in this house, in this building, on this plot of land, in 1793 said, we cannot have that bridge built between Cambridge and Boston. And look why. Look what they said. So people should be laughing. This is kind of ridiculous. They were right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So this bridge was new technology that they were worried were going to corrupt the students. I see people, you know, like scanning it. So right a little after this bridge, this was a chart that was done. It took 5 weeks, 6 weeks to get to California. And then 60, 70 years later, look, the rapid change. You could get 3 days to California from the East Coast. And this is my office. There's a canal that was dug 0.7 miles from the Charles to get here because 9% of the rubber was produced in the United States in this building 100 years ago. And they put train tracks behind it. Tires, women's suffrage, has a direct link to the bicycle. And this was invented in the building. They realized if you put woven material around a rubber hose, you could make it into a productive thing to put out fires. Before that, there was the bucket brigade, and 90% of the hoses were made here. So this guy, William Barton Rogers, was all into the Industrial Revolution, and he surveyed Virginia, and he came up with a great survey that the politicians ended up not using, but he was really frustrated because he couldn't find people to work with him. And instead, he moved to Boston, and he loved how active Boston was. And he's the creator of MIT. These were the first courses because he wanted to create an institute that would build people to react to the time. And then the Alexander Graham Bell, here, do you want to go? I get the signal.
Oh, okay, sure. All right. I think I can do mine in, I'll run through it about 6 minutes, if that's okay. Do I have slides? I wasn't prepared. I don't know if I can see my slides and talk at the same time here. So I just want to talk a little bit about our partnership here, Strategic Alliance Partnership, MOU with Boston Global Forum and AIWS. Thank you, Governor Dukakis and Tuan. It's such an honor. Do I have slides? I do have slides, right? Talk a little bit about we've been talking about a lot of the theory. This is more the practical application. How can we build this knowledge platform? I've been involved in tech companies my whole life. I had the first AI company right across the street from Harvard here after living in Widener Library as a grad student for a number of years. First AI company, first fintech company. We have TAMP and AKT Health. We built this company from a few people 8 years ago. We're now about 45 in 9 countries. So we have a healthcare system side, work with hospitals and doctors, patients, platforms, technology people. On the other side, you can just keep going. It's whenever I finish. And on the other side, more AKT Health is involved in AI platforms, healthcare data analytics. We have a medical blockchain company, et cetera. So we're working on building the data repository, the data management platform. And you can go to the next. You can just keep going. So again, we want to bring, kind of God into the metaverse, if you will, at least ethics, shaping healthcare, national security, ethical AI development. So we want to do it the right way. We've heard a lot of ways to do it the wrong way, digital giants failing, a lot of mistrust, a lot of failures, a lot of security issues. So we're bringing in the security, the privacy. With blockchain, you can continue, and we want to do it the right way with good people that we've attracted here to this wonderful organization. And again, our social compact, as Dr. Nelson said, doesn't need to change for the record, so we'll add that in here. But we want to align with the social contract for the AI age, embedding humanity and compassion and moral judgment. So it really is about the human aspect. You cannot just add technology, as we all know. We want to we're going to be aggregating vast amounts of data, insights, and expertise from around the globe. This will be a robust and forward-thinking partnership supported by top-tier institutions, Harvard, MIT, Yale, Columbia, and others. And we want to set a high standard for AI development, ensuring alignment with ethical practices, again, about the human value, cannot just add technology. I engage with the global community through seminars, conferences. We'll be hosting a 3-day conference at Harvard Club of Boston, downtown in October 8th, 9th, and 10th, bringing in world leaders, significant figures for that conference, for dialogue. And we will work together. We have built a global ecosystem around education, around digital health, technology, around these platforms. Change management is baked in to this, human-centered design. So we have a number of Stanford design thinking, D-School IDEO instructors, coaches. So we want to formalize this collaboration between TAMP, AKT Health, Boston Global Forum, AIWS, and establish this unified commitment to enhance and support the knowledge platform for AI. So we'll focus on tech advancements like blockchain data. And again, you hear blockchain, it's not crypto, this is more the underlying distributed ledger technology, DLT, that's even being adopted by many of the large financial institutions. So it's just for privacy, safety, security, and again, highlight the educational initiatives. We developed the core competencies of mindset, so exponential thinking. We have a number of people from Singularity University, as I mentioned, Stanford Design School, exponential thinking, design thinking, a lot of these different types of mindsets, synarchy versus hierarchy, and a lot of the things that are required as a core competency. And next, so we aim to empower and enhance human capabilities without compromising values or autonomy, and we call on the global community to participate in this ethical AI development as we are doing here. And I will end with our conclusion, our call to action. So we're on the brink of this technological renaissance, committed to ethical progress. So thank you for your support in advance, advancing a future where AI serves humanity with equity and integrity. Thank you very much. Hopefully I kept it short.
Okay, that was quite a whirlwind. We've heard from extraordinary speakers on a range of interrelated topics this afternoon, and there were key themes that emerged and that bridge the talks that we've heard. And there are also key points that were made by each of the expert discussants from their point of view and in the context of their expertise and experience. For reasons of time, I'm not, and nor do you need to hear me sort of explicate them or synthesize them. I think we want to use this time right now to have a discussion, to hear more from some of the speakers, perhaps commenting upon other speakers' talks, but also from everyone in the room. And also, Tuan, we didn't hear from Nakayama Yashude or Elizabeth Moreno. Do they still want to say something? They can talk now. Yep. So are we going to set that up? Okay. So that's the first thing. And then we'll come back to people in the room. Okay, Nakayama Yashude, thank you so much, former Japanese Minister of Defense. We would love to hear your thoughts on the discussion today and your perspective and activities. Can you hear us? Yep. Can you hear us now? Minister Yashude, can you turn on your microphone? You may not be able to hear us. Yeah. Do we want to switch to the next speaker and then come back to him? Yeah. So Elizabeth Moreno, can we see if we can get her?
Yeah.
The former French Minister for Gender Equity, Diversity, and Equal Opportunities. Minister Moreno, can you hear us? So maybe while we're getting things sorted out technically, we can talk with people in the room. Okay, so.
Okay, but can you see me?
We can hear you now. We can see you and hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you now, but I cannot see your face. I mean, yeah, you are invisible.
Yeah, that's okay, but we would love to hear from you, Minister. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I'm so sorry that I apologize for miscalculating the time difference. I had been on Google Meet since a little before 4 a.m. Japan time, which is over an hour ago. But unfortunately, I was late. I sincerely apologize for this. And I also hope you can understand that I have not had any sleep at all tonight. Next time, I will use AI to calculate the time difference. Yes. So anyway, thank you very much. The Japanese government is actually aware of the importance of establishing global governance for AI. When Prime Minister Kishida participated in the AI Safety Summit hosted by the UK, he highlighted the risks and the potential of cutting-edge AI technologies, including generative AI. We have initiated the Hiroshima AI process through the G7 Hiroshima Summit, leading the creation of international rules, which includes the Hiroshima Process International Guidelines and the Hiroshima Process International Code of Conduct. The Japanese government is actively engaged in addressing AI risks, promoting its use and enhancing development capabilities through the Cabinet Office and the relevant ministers. Our initiatives include the phased implementation of generative AI, enhancing skills education across all generations, boosting research capabilities, and supporting STRAPS. The AI World Society, AIWS, part of the Boston Global Forum, contributes significantly to the development of global AI policies, which led by Respect Michael Dukakis, the governor. We are looking forward to proposing concrete collaboration initiatives with AIWS in the future, hoping that this will lay the foundation for a mutually beneficial relationship. And the Japanese government prioritizes a collaboration with the international community, extending beyond the G7 to engage with countries and the private sectors worldwide. The outcomes of the AI Safety Summit and the Hiroshima AI process complement each other, ensuring that the global community can benefit from AI. We continue to work closely together to make this a reality. Through these efforts, the Japanese government not only contributes to safety and the benefits of AI globally, but also deepens cooperation with the international community and established its leadership in technological evolution. We can commit it to building a foundation that manages both the opportunities and risks presented by AI together with the international community. And I have a profound aspiration that I have tirelessly worked towards along with many colleagues and continue to pursue. It is to establish a new United Nations headquarters for the Asia Pacific region in Hiroshima. I firmly believe that Hiroshima is the most appropriate city to discuss peace. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who coincidentally hails from Hiroshima, referred to this initiative as the Hiroshima process in light of the G7 summit held there. While the United Nations has its main headquarters in New York and a Europe office in Geneva, as an Asian, I must highlight the security of such platforms in Asia, where the global community can convene and engage in discourse. Therefore, I propose the establishment of a dedicated United Nations headquarters in Hiroshima, Asia. Each United Nations headquarters has its unique mission. And I suggest that this new location focus on artificial intelligence or AI. Humanity finds convenience in conversing with AI, a form of artificial human, which will likely escalate as we seek to satisfy our curiosity. However, do we know enough about AI to entrust it with such significant roles? This question will increasingly bear down on us as a critical issue. When it becomes crucial to meet and discuss these matters in person without the mediation of the internet, there will be no substitute for direct human interaction. The importance of face-to-face communication cannot be overstated, and we must prepare for potential risks with imagination and foresight. Even if some may criticize it as mere infrastructure without immediate return, I believe it is essential to establish a United Nations Asia Pacific headquarters in Hiroshima, especially to address AI. This would not only serve as a strategic location, but also a symbolic gesture, reinforcing the significance of direct dialogue and cooperation. Additionally, I am currently responsible for investments in deep tech for a fund based in Japan. Our fund is a leading shareholder in Cyabra, the company that Elon Musk used during his Twitter acquisitions. As mentioned earlier, we possess deep tech capabilities to detect, take videos and text. In conclusion, AI might help you find a spouse. However, when it comes to divorce, it won't be able to shed tears alongside you. We must remember this characteristic and think about AI with creativity and imagination. I'd like to one more thing, conclude with one last Japanese lesson. It goes without saying that love is a very important word in English. So what is the Japanese word for love? In Japanese, it is expressed as AI. We call it I. We should remember that I, which means love in Japanese, AI means love in Japanese, represents one of the most challenging concepts to grasp, both for humans and artificial intelligence. Can you see this letter? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dr. Nelson, too. Thank you. Arigato.
Thank you, Minister. That was fantastic, even for no sleep. And this last bit of AI being love, it really gets back to the ethics, doesn't it? Oh, that's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I've been asked to now discuss within the room, and I want to start us off just by asking a question, perhaps first of our speakers and then others, and then we'll go on to other conversation, that troubles me and keeps me awake at night about all of this, which is we've heard tremendous thoughts about how we get out ahead of and address how we're all going to move ahead, hopefully, for good with AI in the world. And my question to you is, how do we deal with the bad actors? Whether that's autocratic governments or groups of people in buildings that they have at arm's length who they say are not part of their government but really are, whether it's terrorist groups, individuals, whether it's people doing something for corrupt monetary gain. If anything, AI and the internet and computing, as we've heard, accelerates in space and time everything that can be done in magnitude. So while we can put together all these systems for good, and most of us can live by them, an increasingly small number of people can do an increasingly large amount of harm and through these technologies. So do any of the speakers have thoughts about how we deal with the bad actors? Sandy? Do you want to speak maybe from the mic, or do we have a mic to pass around so people can hear?
So we heard people talk about deep fakes and things like that, misinformation. The vast amount of misinformation is produced by a very small number of people. Many of them are state actors or driven by essentially local profit things. Small number of people. The sorts of solutions people have produced, which are sort of indexes or watermarks of data, have never worked very well. We've had digital rights management for 30, 40 years, never worked. What works actually is some sort of a provenance mechanism. So knowing where data comes from, knowing that, oh, this one IP address is producing all these different things, and then it gets scored. That's a reputation mechanism. Now, there's a certain part of society that worries about that, of course, because, well, won't the government use that? But there are ways to do that. For instance, you can use client-attorney privilege to verify that it's a human, make an identifier that's anonymous, and it can be traced back to the human, but only by the action of a court. Not just a court order. It actually has to be something that breaks client-attorney privilege. And that's about as strong as you can get. We've been able to show that if you can have those chains of provenance, you can do a huge amount about misinformation, about fake data, deep fakes, things like that, and about state actors. What's required, though, is this: where did the data come from? And the annoying thing is that both the basic mechanisms of the web and the internet itself have those mechanisms already, but nobody uses them. So that S, HTTPS, that S refers to a certificate of authenticity, right? It's called X509. It's used in the government, for instance, to say, oh, you're cleared for highly classified things. It can be done really well, right? But nobody puts it in there because it's not required. The government ought to require it, right? And then you could begin having this sort of reputation mechanism. There are dangers with reputation mechanism. The social credit score sort of thing that you hear about is an example of using that like a sledgehammer. But we also believe that there are good ways to prevent that. And a demonstration of that is if you look at crypto exchanges, which is sort of the wild west of the internet, right? Today in the US, those people are required to have authenticated identity that is then used to generate a synonymous identifier so that when something really bad happens, you can trace it back to the person. It's not used everywhere, but it's used in a lot of the exchanges. Personally, I'm really good with all of this stuff because you might notice that, for instance, fraud in those areas funds about half of North Korea's nuclear program. I think that would be a good thing to start. Let's shut that down. So just there are things that are part of this. We co-chair the IETF, one of my guys, Thomas Arjono, which is the internet standards body. And we're pretty close to having a full implementation of what's called the travel rule approved, which means it would have to be part of everything on the internet for all the compliant countries anyhow. So there's some steps being done. We could actually do this, but it takes understanding of those sort of technical things and then the political will to actually create a standard and enforce the standard to make that happen. And simple things like the government putting that as a you shall do this in all of its purchase orders doesn't have to be a big policy thing. That's the power of the government dollar, right? We could do a huge amount. It wouldn't fix everything, but it would do a huge amount.
Thank you, Sandy. This is one of the benefits of the Boston Global Forum, is to bring people who can actually do the things in government, together with the academics, the NGOs, and industry, and so forth. It's still vexing in terms of the problems around autocracies and how they can use it, quote, legitimately within their own society. But without getting dystopian, let's open it up for other questions and comments. We have a great group of people in the room, speakers and others. Do other people have points they want to make about any of the discussions or issues today? Please. Do we have a mic that we can hand around? Or do people want to come up so that they can be heard?
Okay. If I can, I'd like to invite Ken. Ken. Invite Ken.
Thank you, Tuan. And our congratulations. It's wonderful to see you here today and to be able to celebrate your work and your leadership. I do have a couple of comments that I wanted to make in response to some of the discussions that I heard today, and particularly to the notion of data sovereignty. I think that the framework that I heard outlined, I see as very much the kind of thing that we need. I have trouble with the framing of it as data sovereignty, because I think in today's world that has a meaning that can be, frankly, sometimes in some circumstances pernicious. We have a global discussion going on about data and the free movement of data, and various countries that talk about digital sovereignty or data sovereignty in ways that can impede the objective of the framework, which is to aggregate information in ways that can expand knowledge. But digital sovereignty can operate misapplied, can operate in the opposite direction. And I worked on a paper with one of Sandy's star graduate students, Yves Alexandre de Montjoie, who's now at Imperial College, and with Jake Kendall at the Gates Foundation, looking at some of the challenges of sharing mobile data and using big data for humanitarian purposes. The challenges, both technical challenges in terms of doing that in privacy-protecting ways, but enabling the utility of that data. And we were looking at this in the context of using it for tracking movements for purposes of disease migration in West African countries. And one of the regulatory obstacles that was cropping up was ministries within government saying, we don't want to share this data with humanitarian organizations, because it's our data, it's our country's data, it has to stay within our borders. And that approach simply works, I think, against the expansion of knowledge that aggregating data, using, bringing together various institutions can help to achieve. And then, of course, we've heard about the impacts of authoritarian governments as well, and to them, data sovereignty represents an even broader concept. Yes, we all have national security issues to deal with, but not everything, every use of data is a national security use. We have to be very, very concrete and very focused in how that is done. So I will leave it at that, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
No. So now, 1 second. The next, we have things worked out with Elizabeth Moreno. So can we hear from France? And
Elizabeth, please open and unmute your microphone. Not from us, from you.
if you can please unmute.
Unmute. Elizabeth.
And we'd love to hear from you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Maybe problem.
So it would be wonderful, please.
Okay.
You're from Italy.
So thank you very much. I'm Francesco Lepenta. I'm the director of the Institute of Future Innovation Studies, but more importantly, I'm the representative of the Boston Global Forum in Rome, and I had the opportunity to work with Michael Dukakis and all the team. And I just want to express my congratulations to Dr. Londra Nelson for the outstanding work that she has done so far. But there's also an encouragement to continue the amazing work, because I think she has a great opportunity by contributing to the platform that has been created by the UN for Artificial Intelligence. I have the honor and privilege of having met Amandeep Gill several times, including in personal conversations, and that we just published a report very much based on this conversation with Amandeep on the issue of representation and the issue of diversity in the development of artificial intelligence, but also in the ginormous gap that exists in the opportunities that should be offered by artificial intelligence. In my view, if we need, as a society, to develop artificial intelligence, the only reason why we should develop artificial intelligence is to solve common problems for everybody. It shouldn't be another tool that is used by a minority to solve minorities' problem, but in reality it should be a complex system that is used to contribute to creating a leveling field for everybody. And this is on that note, for example, that I wrote this report that has been published 3 days ago. Deciding to act is an important thing, because many times the idea of technology as the problem solver is really overestimating the function of technology. You emphasized it, and other presenters emphasized it, that technology in the end is governed by human action. And human action is what really created social change in the history of humanity, and technology will continue to remain such. So it's very important to understand the agency of humanity and not to delegate this idea of innovation to the machine, because every social innovation in reality is being the product of humans. So this is one of the emphasis. Perhaps if I want to formulate this as a question, is what you would see as the most influential steps that the United Nations could take to improve the equal distribution and opportunity of artificial intelligence. Is there something that we can do or contribute? Do you have an agenda that you can recommend, or do you have any kind of actionable suggestions for what we can do as a community to do and improve this equality? And to conclude, it needs to be reminded that also gender representation is one of the key issues in artificial intelligence. So the fact that you are representing also gender in that group is very, very important. Thank you very much, and congratulations again for the award. Well deserved. Thank you.
So that brings to a close our afternoon session. And Tuan, please, in terms of the final award.
Long discussion already, and we are very honored and very delighted and glad and happy to receive great speakers and great ideas and initiative, many wonderful thoughts and works, and I think that is a very good and excellent for AI governance for future, and for our initiative start. I talk and our college talk already, and now yes, it's the time, as I talk, it's the time to action, and I hope we can work together as a Web Lab in MIT with a great platform. And I love very much your talk and your ideas. And when I read your paper with Sandy, immediately I talk and I connect with Sandy. Oh, Sandy should talk it and discuss in this event. And I hope it is a start for us to collaborate and to promote for that. And also I love very much from Alondra AIS and from many initiatives and AI politics, AI for democracy. That's wonderful. I think today is a very start for us together to work together with your center and also your initiative, and very humanity, very meaningful for the world. And as Governor Michael Dukakis is dedicated to the US and the world, so we are love for that. And also many our as partners, David Ho, and thank for your contribution and your very enthusiasm to collaborate to make our ideas and our knowledge platform and data sovereignty to practice and make happen from companies. That's very important. We think, we talk and discuss, but now is the time to work and make it happen. So thank you so much, and great collaboration between our group. And also we look forward to October 7 and 8 event with David and his company. And we hope all of us continue work together for that. And also, finally, this year is a 10th year from Boston Global Forum, Japan. And today we are very glad and very happy to honor and our representative of Boston Global Forum in Japan, Nobimita. Yeah.
Thank you.
She did amazing job for 10 years, Boston Global Forum in Japan. And we would like to, yes, we would like to have a gift to present.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes. better gift.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
I
And,
appreciate you so much.
and also, final, that is Shinzo Abe from Japan. Shinzo Abe initiative have that award they will do future in June. That is ceremony. But today we announce that 3 young leader will award Shinzo Abe Youth Leader Award. That the current matcha company with CEO L0 Tuskada company will with CEO Satoshi Suzuki company Onmondo Mr. CEO Kuta Ito. Thank you so much for and congratulations. So, okay, so thank you for all. But okay, now we conclude and final our meeting and see you in autumn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Together. 10th anniversary.
Yes,
Thank you so much. I'm glad.
Yes, a picture of you.
Oh,
sure, yes.
At the Loeb house, chandelier was chandelier. Loeb
Oh, you want that? Okay. I have to, all right, I better, all right. I'll meet you in front in a minute. Just give me a minute.